There is a particular kind of evening. You know the one. Everything is done, the day is finished, or at least it has stopped asking things of you. The lights are low or off entirely, and the world outside has finally gone quiet. And yet something in you has not gone quiet. Not anxiety exactly, not sadness exactly. Something that sits beneath both of those, older than them, quieter than them, and somehow harder to name. A kind of weight that lives in your chest without apology. A feeling that the day and perhaps many days before it has moved past you like water through your hands and you held none of it. You are lying there and the ceiling is doing what ceilings do, offering nothing, expecting nothing. And in the strange honesty of that moment, you find yourself wondering something that you would not say out loud, not to your friends, not to anyone really. You wonder if you're living the way you were supposed to be living. If the version of yourself that exists right now is the one that was always meant to arrive. If the distance between who you are and who you sense you could be is something that narrows, or if it simply grows wider with every year that passes quietly, without ceremony, without answer. This feeling has no clean name in the language we currently use. We call it restlessness sometimes. We call it anxiety or burnout or existential dread when we want to sound like we have it classified. But classification is not comfort. Naming a thing does not dissolve it. And I think you already know this, which is why you are still here, still listening, rather than scrolling into something loud and bright and deliberately distracting. What I want to offer you tonight is not a solution. I want to say that clearly from the beginning, because there is a particular kind of disappointment that comes from believing a thing will fix you and then discovering that it will not. I have no interest in adding to that particular grief. What I want to offer instead is something older and stranger and, I think, more quietly valuable. The company of people who felt what you feel, who lived inside the same confusion, and who left behind in the form of myths and stories and philosophical fragments, something that might be called understanding. Not answers, understanding, which is a different thing, and in certain hours a better one. The ancient Greeks are not who most people think they are. When we imagine them, we tend to imagine marble, white and cold and impossibly perfect. We imagine philosophers in togas delivering speeches that have already been polished into permanence. We imagine gods as decorative myth, as childish explanation, a pre-scientific attempt to explain thunder and earthquakes before we had the instruments to know better. This is almost entirely wrong. The Greeks were troubled. They were confused. They fought wars they did not understand for reasons they had to invent. They built cities and watched them collapse. They loved people who left them. They asked questions about the nature of existence and received in return only more questions. And from that particular ache, they built one of the richest traditions of thought the human species has ever produced. Their myths were not fairy tales. They were not children's stories dressed in sandals. They were the way a civilization processed its deepest fears: fear of death, fear of meaninglessness, fear of the gods inside themselves, the parts of human nature that do terrible and beautiful things in equal measure. Every monster in Greek mythology is an externalized internal conflict. Every hero is a portrait of ambition at war with its own cost. Every god is a piece of human psychology given infinite power and asked implicitly what happens then. We are going to walk through 50 of those lessons tonight, slowly, without rushing toward any particular destination, because this is not a list. It is more like a river, and lists move in straight lines, and rivers do not. Some of these lessons will feel immediately true, like something you already knew but had never heard said. Others will feel strange and resistant, the way wisdom sometimes does when it asks you to look at something you have been carefully not looking at. Both responses are correct. Both mean you are paying attention. Tonight, we return to a time before GPS and notification systems and the particular fatigue that comes from being constantly exhaustingly reachable. We return to people who sat under the same stars you might see if you stepped outside right now, if you looked up instead of down. And we let what they discovered speak to where you are tonight. Not because the past was better, it almost certainly was not, but because the questions they carried are your questions too. And there is something quietly powerful about knowing that the weight you feel in your chest at midnight is not new, is not strange, is not a malfunction. It is one of the oldest human experiences there is, and it was, for the Greeks, the beginning of everything worth knowing. So settle in, let the night be what it is, and let us begin. There is a concept in Greek thought, almost untranslatable, which is always a good sign that something real is being pointed at, called aporia. It describes the state of being genuinely stuck, not lazy stuck, not distracted stuck, but philosophically, honestly stuck, arrived at the end of all your reasoning and found nothing there but more questions. Socrates made a career of leading people into aporia. He would approach someone who seemed confident, a politician, a craftsman, a general who had won battles, and he would begin asking questions, gentle questions. At first, what is courage? What is justice? What does it mean to live a good life? And with each answer, he would ask another question, and with each answer to that another, until the person who had begun the conversation, certain of what they knew, arrived at the unsettling discovery that they did not in fact know the thing they had been so certain about. This was not cruelty, though it was sometimes mistaken for cruelty, which is one of the reasons the Athenians eventually decided to kill him. It was the most honest intellectual service one person can render another, to show them the actual shape of their uncertainty, so that they can stop performing confidence they do not have and begin the actual work of understanding. Aporia is not failure. Aporia is the prerequisite. You have probably been living inside a form of aporia for some time now. That sense that you're working very hard and moving very fast and accumulating all the external evidence of a life being lived, and yet something essential remains unresolved, unaddressed, quietly asking its question in the hours when everything goes still. That is not a problem that arrived recently. That is what happens when intelligent, feeling people live in a world that is very good at filling every quiet moment with noise and have therefore never had the silence required to actually hear what they think. Tonight we repair that, at least for a while. The Greeks would have recognized you instantly. Let me tell you about Sisyphus first, not because he is lesson one, though in a sense everything begins with him, but because his story is the one that most honestly captures the condition we are examining tonight. Sisyphus was a king. He was also famously a cheat. He cheated death not once but twice, tricking first Thanatos, the god of death, and then Persephone herself in the underworld into letting him return to the living world on the grounds that he had unfinished business. A wife who had not given him a proper burial and certain affairs that required his attention. He was clever. He was charming. He was the kind of person who could talk his way out of anything, and for a while that was enough. Eventually the gods, who have long memories as all-powerful forces do, retrieved him permanently and gave him his famous punishment, to roll a boulder up a steep hill for eternity, and to watch it roll back down each time he neared the top, and to begin again. The philosopher Albert Camus, who was French and 20th century rather than Greek, wrote a famous essay about this myth. He asked a question that most people avoid. We must imagine Sisyphus happy, not because the boulder is pleasant, not because the endless repetition is secretly meaningful in some way he has discovered, but because Sisyphus owns his fate. He is fully present to his punishment in a way that most of us are never fully present to our lives. He has no illusions. The boulder is the boulder. The hill is the hill. And in that stripped-down honesty, there is something that functions, if not as happiness, then at least as a form of sovereignty. I want to return to Sisyphus later, because what Camus saw in him is connected to something we will need when we arrive at the deeper waters of this journey. But for now, I only want to plant the image. A man who rolls a boulder and knows exactly what he is doing and has decided, against all apparent reason, to be present to it anyway. There are worse portraits of the human condition, and there is something in that image, I think, that speaks to the particular heaviness of the evenings when you feel like you're doing the same things again and in the same sequence. And they are not adding up to what you expected them to add up to, and the hill keeps being the hill. Lesson 1, then. The weight you feel is not a malfunction. It is a sign that you are the kind of person who asks real questions. Every tradition of human wisdom begins not with an answer, but with the recognition that something is wrong or incomplete or unresolved. The Buddha sat under a tree because he was suffering. Socrates walked the streets of Athens because he was uncertain. Job cried out from the ash heap because his suffering demanded explanation. The weight you carry tonight is not evidence that you are broken. It is evidence that you are honest enough to feel what is real and brave enough, at least in these quiet hours, to let it be felt rather than buried under noise and distraction. That is where everything begins. Lesson 2. The Greeks had a word for the kind of excellence that a human being could achieve in their specific domain, arete. We translate it as virtue sometimes, or excellence, but neither word fully captures what they meant. Arete was not moral goodness in the Christian sense. The Greeks had a much more complicated relationship with goodness than that. Arete was closer to full actualization. It described a knife that was excellent at being a knife, sharp, well-balanced, precisely fitted to its purpose. Applied to a human being, it meant someone who had fully become what they were capable of becoming, not morally superior, not wealthy or powerful, but deeply, precisely themselves. The tragedy that lives inside that concept, and the Greeks were extraordinarily good at building tragedy into their most beautiful ideas, is that most people never discover what their arete actually is. They spend their lives approximating someone else's arete, living inside someone else's version of excellence, performing a shape of a life that was designed by forces external to them. Family expectation, cultural pressure, the desire not to seem strange or lost or insufficient. And there is a particular kind of grief that accompanies this, quiet, persistent, difficult to source, because it is not the grief of something lost, but of something never found. Have you ever met someone who is doing exactly what they are meant to be doing? Not someone who has found success in the conventional sense. Success and arete are not the same thing, and the Greeks knew this, and it was one of the things that made them complicated and interesting. I mean someone who is so precisely themselves, in the work they do, in the way they speak, in the particular quality of their attention, that being around them produces a kind of recognition, as if they are demonstrating something you already know is possible but have not yet made real in yourself. The feeling of meeting that person is one of the most quietly painful experiences available to a thoughtful human being, because it shows you the distance between where you are and where you sense you could be, and it shows it to you without cruelty, without judgment, simply by existing. That feeling is data. That feeling is trying to tell you something real. We will spend a great deal of this evening with that feeling, not to intensify it, but to understand what it is made of and where it leads. Lesson 3 is about Prometheus, and it is about the particular punishment of being ahead of your time. Prometheus was a Titan, a member of the generation of gods that preceded the Olympians, which is itself interesting because it means he predated the civilization he served. He stole fire from the gods and gave it to human beings. In doing so, he gave humanity technology, warmth, cooking, the capacity to survive harsh winters and dark nights. He gave them the essential ingredient of civilization, and for this, Zeus, who had specifically denied fire to humanity for reasons that in some versions of the myth amount to simple possessiveness, chained Prometheus to a rock and arranged for an eagle to eat his liver each day. Each night the liver would regenerate so that the punishment could be repeated indefinitely. There are many things to notice about this story. The first is that Prometheus was punished not for doing something wicked, but for doing something genuinely good. The beneficiaries of his action were humanity. They received warmth and light and the possibility of civilization. The punishment was entirely about the disruption of existing order, about the introduction of something that had not been permitted, about the challenge to the authority of whoever controls what people are allowed to have. This is a pattern you will recognize. History is full of people who gave fire and were punished for it, and the punishment was almost never proportional to any actual harm caused, and almost always proportional to the degree of disruption to whoever considered themselves in charge of the fire. The second thing to notice is the regenerating liver. The Greeks were specific about this. The punishment was not merely imprisonment, it was cyclical agony. The cycle itself being the torture. This speaks to something the Greeks understood deeply about certain kinds of suffering. That what makes it unbearable is not any single episode, but the repetition, the renewal, the discovery that it begins again. There is a kind of suffering that exhausts itself, burns bright and then diminishes, and then there is the kind that restores itself overnight, and that restoration is precisely the cruelty. If you have ever lived inside that second kind of suffering, the kind that resets each morning so that you begin again with the full weight of it, then Prometheus is your myth, and the lesson embedded in his story is one that takes time to absorb, because it is not comfortable. Sometimes the punishment is real, and it is not your fault, and enduring it is not the same as deserving it. This matters more than it sounds. We live in a culture that has a strong, mostly unexamined belief that suffering is earned, that if you suffer, it is because you did something wrong, failed to be strategic enough, chose badly, missed something that a wiser person would not have missed. Prometheus disrupts this. He did something genuinely good. He paid an enormous price. Both of these things are true simultaneously, and the myth does not resolve the tension between them. It just holds it. Let us pause here for a moment, not to add anything, just to let the room settle. There is something in the night air, at this hour, in this particular quality of silence, that makes ideas land differently than they do in the daytime. During the day, there is always somewhere to be, something to respond to, a context that frames every thought you have at night alone. The frames fall away, and you encounter ideas in a more naked way. This is both more uncomfortable and more useful than daylight thinking. It is not a coincidence that most real philosophy happens at night, or in the quiet hours just before dawn, or in the liminal states that exist at the edges of sleep. The ancient philosophers knew this. Many of them wrote letters at night. Seneca famously so. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations not as a public document, but as a private journal for himself in the hours that no one else could see. There is a tradition of honest thinking in the dark, and you are part of it tonight, which means something, even if it is difficult to say exactly what. Lesson 4. Narcissus and the trap of self-reflection gone wrong. You know this story. The beautiful youth who fell in love with his own reflection in a pool and could not leave it and wasted away staring at the face he could not stop looking at. The myth is usually understood as a warning against vanity, against caring too much about your own appearance. But this reading is too shallow, and the Greeks were never shallow. Narcissus did not love his appearance for the pleasure it gave him. He loved it because he could not look away. That is a different thing. Vanity is interested in the audience. What Narcissus suffered from was a kind of compulsion, an inability to escape his own gaze, a trap built not of pride but of a deeper confusion about the relationship between the self and the self. We might call it, in more contemporary terms, rumination, the inability to stop examining yourself, revisiting yourself, turning your own experience over and over in your mind until the thought becomes not a tool for understanding but the medium you live inside, a pool you have fallen into and cannot climb out of. The Greeks understood that this kind of self-consciousness, taken past a certain point, becomes its own prison, not because self-knowledge is bad. Socrates built his entire life on the instruction, know thyself, and we will spend time with that instruction later. But because there is a point at which self-examination ceases to produce knowledge and begins to produce only more examination in an infinite mirror of itself, and the water just keeps reflecting the same face back, the lesson embedded in Narcissus is not stop caring about yourself. It is closer to learn to look up. The pool is real. Your face in the pool is real. But the pool is not the world. The world continues past the edges of your gaze. And the life you lose staring into your own reflection is the only life you had. Lesson 5. Orpheus went to the underworld for love. This is the story everyone knows. The musician whose music was so beautiful it could move rocks and trees and rivers, who lost his wife Eurydice on their wedding day. She died from a snake bite, which in Greek myth often functions as the randomness of the world, the death that comes not from war or hubris or divine punishment, but simply from the bad luck of a wrong step in a field, and who descended into Hades itself to bring her back. His music charmed Cerberus, the three-headed dog at the gates. It moved Persephone to tears. It convinced Hades himself, who was not known for his sympathy, to release Eurydice on one condition. Orpheus must lead her back to the surface without looking back at her. He must trust in the darkness of the underworld that she is following. He looked back, almost at the threshold, and she was gone. The interpretations of this moment are many, and each one is interesting in its own way. Some say it was love. He looked back because he couldn't bear not to know if she was there, and love in its deepest form sometimes defeats its own purpose. Some say it was doubt. Some say it was the impossibility of the condition itself, that asking someone who has just lost everything to walk forward in pure faith, without any verification, without any reassurance, is a condition that no ordinary human psychology can meet. These are all true. They can all be true simultaneously. This is one of the things myths do better than arguments. They hold several truths in tension without demanding that we choose. What the story of Orpheus teaches in its quietest register is something about the nature of grief and the terms on which we can move through it. There are losses in life, and you have had them, and will have more, where the condition of recovery is exactly this. You must walk forward and not look back. Not because what you lost was not real or not worth grieving, not because the past is unimportant or the love was insufficient, but because the act of looking back in certain circumstances is itself the thing that prevents the returning. Grief has a logic to it. So does healing, and sometimes they are in direct contradiction, and you have to choose which one you are going to honor, knowing that the choice has a cost either way. Orpheus chose love. He looked back. You can call this failure, and the myth presents it in some sense as a failure, but there is also something unbearably honest about it. The music that moved gods and stones could not move its creator beyond the limits of his own human heart. There is a version of this story in which Orpheus succeeds, walks forward, delivers Eurydice to the light, and they live some ordinary version of a life. And I sometimes wonder if that version is actually the sadder one. Lesson 6 is about time, and it comes from the figure of Kronos. Not to be confused with Chronos, which is a common confusion and worth addressing. Chronos is chronological time, the regular, ticking, measurable sequence of moments that clocks are designed to track. Kronos is something else. He is the titan who ate his own children. He is power devouring its own future in order to protect itself from being replaced. He is the past consuming the present to prevent the arrival of what comes next. And this is one of the most accurate mythological portraits of a certain relationship with time. The way fear of what is coming causes a person or a civilization to eat everything it has built. But the Greek understanding of time included a third concept that neither Kronos nor Chronos captures: kairos. Kairos is the right moment, not time as sequence, not time as devouring power, but time as the particular quality of a specific instant, the moment that is exactly correct for a particular action. Archers used it, physicians used it, the moment when the arrow must be released, when the treatment must be applied, when the word must be spoken too early and nothing takes hold, too late, and the moment has passed. Kairos is the skill of recognizing and meeting the right moment. Most of us live almost entirely in Chronos, moving through time by the clock, by the schedule, by the accumulation of days that begin to feel interchangeable. Very few people develop a real sensitivity to Kairos, to the quality of moments rather than their position in sequence. But the Greeks believed this sensitivity was cultivable, that it was a form of wisdom, and that a life organized around Kairos rather than Chronos alone was a qualitatively different kind of life, more awake, more responsive to what is actually happening rather than what the schedule says should be happening. This is worth sitting with tonight, in the particular quality of this specific hour, which is itself a kind of kairos, a moment when the noise has dropped enough that you can actually hear something true. We have covered 6 lessons and we are just beginning. The deeper waters are still ahead. But I want to acknowledge something before we go further, something that I think is important to name, even though it is uncomfortable to name it. The ancient Greeks were not always wise. They owned slaves. They excluded women from public life in ways that we recognize from our position in time as profoundly wrong. Their democracy, which they invented and of which they were justifiably proud, was accessible to only a fraction of the population of Athens. Their treatment of conquered peoples was often brutal. They were not enlightened. They were human, which means they contained the full range of human capacity. The extraordinary and the shameful, the beautiful and the cruel often simultaneously. I tell you this not to undermine everything else we are discussing tonight, but because intellectual honesty is one of the things I believe in most strongly. And intellectual honesty requires acknowledging that wisdom and injustice can coexist in the same civilization, the same tradition, sometimes the same person. Aristotle, who was one of the greatest intellectual minds the human species has produced, also wrote at length to justify the institution of slavery. These two facts are both true. Holding them together without either canceling the other out, that is itself a form of philosophical work. And it is not easy, and it matters. The wisdom we take from the Greeks tonight is real. The flaws in the civilization that produced it are also real. We can honor both. Let the night deepen now. We are going further in. The goddess Athena is interesting in a way that her conventional portrayal rarely captures. We know her as the goddess of wisdom, of strategy, of craft. Born fully formed from the forehead of Zeus after he swallowed her pregnant mother Metis. She emerges in armor, already adult, already wise, already a being of pure intellect, uncompromised by the messiness of childhood, adolescence, vulnerability. And this origin is exactly the problem with how we tend to think about wisdom itself. We imagine it arrives fully formed from somewhere clean, bypassing the process of growing up. But Athena's myth, read more carefully, says something different. Zeus swallowed Metis because a prophecy told him his children would surpass him. He was afraid of being replaced by wisdom, a very human fear, dressed in divine clothing. Wisdom was born, in other words, from swallowed fear. from a mind that could not bear to look directly at its own vulnerability, from the anxiety of someone in power who could not accept that power is temporary. Athena, pure, brilliant, strategic Athena, is what happens when suppressed fear becomes something else, not by being resolved, but by being transformed, contained, redirected. Lesson 7. Wisdom is not born clean. It is born from the things that were swallowed, the fears that could not be faced directly, the griefs that were too large to be named, the uncertainties that had to be metabolized into something manageable before they could become anything useful. The person who seems wise to you, who carries themselves with a quality of steadiness that you find yourself envying, that steadiness was not given to them. They built it from the same material available to you. Difficulty, confusion, the experience of being lost and not knowing what came next, and surviving it and surviving the next thing, until the pattern of surviving accumulated into something that resembled confidence. That is not the same as fearlessness. It is something better. The knowledge that fear, taken seriously and walked through honestly, does not destroy you. Lesson 8. Apollo and the problem with pure reason. Apollo was the god of light, of reason, of music, of order. The principle of the rational mind applied to the world with maximum clarity. He was beautiful and brilliant and impossibly competent, and he was also, in the stories the Greeks told about him, often profoundly wrong, not about facts, but about what facts could do, about the role of pure reason in the management of a human life. His twin sister Artemis is interesting in this regard. She is the goddess of the hunt, of the moon, of wildness, everything that lives outside the city walls, outside the ordered civilization that Apollo represents. She is not irrational. She is pre-rational, or perhaps more precisely, differently rational. The intelligence of instinct, of embodied knowledge, of knowing things the way the body knows things, rather than the way the mind knows them. The Greeks did not elevate one twin over the other. Both were necessary. The festival of Apollo and the rite of Artemis were both part of the religious calendar. Civilization required both. We have in the modern world conducted a very long experiment in Apollonian dominance, the supremacy of rational, measurable, quantifiable knowledge over all other forms. The results are extraordinary in many ways and genuinely impoverishing in others. We have cured diseases and built machines of astonishing capability and developed systems of understanding that would stagger a Greek philosopher. We have also in the same period produced epidemic rates of anxiety, disconnection from the natural world, a relationship with our own bodies that is often adversarial, and a pervasive sense of being intelligent in the approved ways while feeling profoundly mysteriously stupid about the actual texture of being alive. Artemis has been largely expelled from the city, and the city misses her in ways it does not always have the vocabulary to name. The lesson in the Apollo-Artemis balance is not that reason is bad. Reason is magnificent, but reason that is not checked by the knowledge of the body, the knowledge of instinct, the kind of intelligence that lives in the gut rather than the head, that kind of reason tends toward a particular form of failure. It makes excellent maps of territories it has never visited. It produces perfect theories about experiences it has never had, and it is always slightly surprised when reality fails to behave according to the plan. Lesson 9. The Minotaur and the labyrinths we build to contain what we cannot face. The Minotaur, half man, half bull, was the monstrous offspring of Pasiphae, the queen of Crete, and a bull sent by Poseidon as a test of piety that Pasiphae's husband, King Minos, failed. Minos had promised the bull to Poseidon and then kept it, substituting another animal, because the bull was too magnificent to give away. Poseidon's revenge was to cause Pasiphae to fall in love with the bull. The Minotaur was the result. And then Minos, in a move that is deeply recognizable, did not face what had happened. He did not acknowledge the monster or examine its origin, or sit with the complexity of the disaster his own failure had set in motion. He built a labyrinth, an impossibly intricate maze designed by Daedalus, and he put the Minotaur inside it, and he locked the door, and he fed it with tribute from Athens. 7 young men and 7 young women sent each year to be consumed. This is one of the most psychologically accurate myths in the entire Greek tradition, what Minos did. Building an elaborate containment structure for the thing he could not face, and then feeding it at regular intervals to keep it quiet, is something that most people do in some version at some point in their lives. We build labyrinths inside ourselves. We put the things we cannot look at directly into the interior maze, and we keep them there at a distance, and every now and then we feed them a little piece of something, a distracting behavior, a numbing substance, an achievement that reassures us temporarily that we are fine, and we do not go into the center because we have heard what lives in the center and we are frightened of it. What Theseus showed, what the hero's journey into the labyrinth always shows, is that the monster in the center is almost always smaller in the encounter than it was in the imagination. The labyrinth is scarier than the Minotaur. The anticipation of the confrontation produces more suffering than the confrontation itself. This is not universally true. Some things are genuinely as bad as we fear, or worse. But the particular kind of monster that lives in the center of the personal labyrinth, the fear you have been feeding with avoidance, the truth you have been keeping at maze depth, the grief or anger or longing you have been routing around, that monster, when you finally go to meet it, is usually possible to survive. And surviving it is the beginning of not needing the labyrinth anymore. Lesson 10. Eros and the philosophy of desire. Eros, usually translated as love, usually imagined as a chubby winged infant with a bow and arrow, was, in the earliest Greek sources, something much stranger and more powerful. In Hesiod's Theogony, one of the oldest Greek texts we have, Eros is one of the primordial forces, alongside Chaos and Gaia and Tartarus, not a minor deity, not a decorative figure, a cosmic principle, the force that draws things together, that makes things want to join with other things, that is responsible for the basic motion of the universe from separation toward union, the philosopher Plato's Symposium. One of the most extraordinary documents in the Western philosophical tradition is a dinner party at which various guests make speeches about the nature of Eros. Each speech is interesting, but the one that lands deepest and has landed deepest for 2.5 millennia of readers is the one Socrates reports from a woman named Diotima, whom he describes as his teacher in matters of love. Diotima's account of Eros is this: love is not a god but a spirit, a daimon, that mediates between the human and the divine, and its fundamental nature is not the satisfaction of desire, but the experience of longing itself. Eros loves what it lacks. This is its nature, and this means that a desire satisfied is a desire that has, in a sense, ceased to be Eros. It has become something else, something satisfied and complete, which is different from the reaching quality of love in its pure form. This is philosophically interesting and personally uncomfortable because it implies that the fulfillment of desire does not end desire. It merely redirects it, which you have probably experienced. You wanted something and you got it, and the wanting settled for a moment and then began again, slightly different, pointing at something new. The Greek insight is that this is not failure. This is not a malfunction of the desiring mechanism. It is the nature of Eros itself. You are a creature built for longing, and the question is not how to satisfy the longing. That is temporary, and the Greeks knew it. But how to make your longing point towards something worth longing for. There is something worth pausing on here, an image that might help carry us through the next section of our journey. Imagine a garden that has not been tended, not ruined, not abandoned entirely, just allowed to grow in its own direction for a while, without interference, without the corrective hand of someone who knows what they are trying to cultivate. The roses have gone in a direction no gardener planned. The paths are partially overgrown. There are plants that do not belong alongside each other by conventional standards, but which have arranged themselves into something that has its own strange beauty. And there is a question, standing at the edge of that garden late in the evening in a particular quality of light, about whether what is needed is a rigorous restoration or simply a different kind of attention, a willingness to see what is actually there rather than what the plan called for. Your life might be that garden. We will see. Lesson 11. Daedalus and the Ethics of Invention. Daedalus was the greatest craftsman and inventor in the Greek mythological tradition. He made the wooden cow that allowed Pasiphae to consort with the bull. He built the labyrinth to contain the Minotaur. He crafted wings of wax and feathers for himself and his son Icarus when they needed to escape from Crete. He is the patron of makers, of people who build things, who solve problems through ingenuity, who look at a situation and immediately begin calculating the solution. And he is also, in a way that is not often noted, a portrait of the moral consequences of pure technical competence. Every invention Daedalus made was technically extraordinary. Every invention Daedalus made served the immediate need of whoever commissioned it. And every invention had consequences, large, unpredictable, often catastrophic consequences that extended far beyond the immediate context. The wooden cow gave Crete its monster. The labyrinth gave Athens its annual tribute of sacrifice. The wings gave Icarus the means of his death. Daedalus was not careless. He was a master of his craft. But mastery of craft is not the same as wisdom about when and whether to deploy it. He built what was asked of him, and the asking was not always innocent, and the building was not always without cost, and he survived his inventions in ways that he perhaps did not deserve to survive. This matters in the present moment, when we are surrounded by inventions of extraordinary capability and are still working out what they do to us. The question Daedalus embodies is not technical, it is ethical. Not can we, but should we? Not how do we make this work, but what does it cost, and who pays the cost, and are we willing to include that calculation in the price? These are questions that the craftsman, in his flow of making, does not always stop to ask. And the myth of Daedalus, who survived, who kept inventing, who is never shown as a villain despite the trail of consequences behind him, suggests that the Greeks understood this tension and did not resolve it. They held it in the shape of a story and let it work on you over time. Lesson 12. Icarus and the two kinds of warnings. Everyone knows the warning of Icarus. Do not fly too high. The sun will melt your wings. Do not be too ambitious. Stay close to the middle. This is the reading that has made Icarus into a cautionary tale, and it is the reading that gets repeated in business books and self-help guides and graduation speeches as a warning against overreach. But there is a second warning in the myth that almost no one mentions, because it does not fit the expected lesson as cleanly. Daedalus told Icarus not to fly too high, but he also told him not to fly too low. Too close to the sea and the wings would become waterlogged, too heavy to carry him. Too close to the earth and the detail of the labyrinth he had spent his life building would overwhelm him with its complexity. The two warnings together create a different lesson. Not, be modest. Not, do not aim too high, but find the middle air. Not through timidity, but through calibration. Too high and the sun burns you, too low and the sea swallows you. The instruction is not to abandon flight, it is to develop the judgment to sustain it. Icarus failed not because he tried to fly. Flight was the only way out of the labyrinth, but because he could not maintain the discipline of the middle altitude. The ecstasy of the height was too much for him. and he forgot the warning, and the sun was real, as all warnings are eventually real when ignored long enough. You probably know which failure is more tempting for you. Some people fly too high. They set impossible standards and crash repeatedly and never learn to calibrate their ambition to what is actually sustainable. Others fly too low. They stay so close to the ground, so cautious, so afraid of the sun, that they never actually escape the labyrinth at all. They spend their lives in the maze, safely, unhappily. Both of these are failures of a kind, and what Daedalus was trying to teach his son in the moment before they leapt from the cliff above the sea was not smallness. It was judgment, the specific practiced, embodied judgment of someone who knows the air. Lesson 13. Cassandra and the particular anguish of being right. Cassandra was a princess of Troy who was given the gift of prophecy by Apollo. And then, when she refused his advances, cursed with the condition that no one would ever believe her, she saw the future. She knew the wooden horse was a trap. She knew Troy would fall. She stood in the streets and told anyone who would listen. And no one listened. And she was right. And none of it mattered. And she watched everything she had predicted come true anyway. The particular psychological texture of Cassandra's suffering is worth examining carefully, because it is not a suffering most people talk about, and it is more common than you might think. It is the suffering of the person who sees clearly and is not believed, who understands a situation that others around them cannot see or refuse to see, and who must watch the consequences of that blindness unfold in real time, unable to intervene, unable to change the trajectory, able only to witness. This is a form of powerlessness that is especially corrosive because it is paired with clarity rather than confusion. Ordinary grief can be confusing. You don't always know why you suffer, and that confusion has its own quality. Cassandra's grief is different. She knows exactly why she suffers, exactly what is coming, and knowing does not help. There are people who live in some degree of Cassandra's situation, who see patterns that others around them cannot or will not see, who understand the shape of a problem before it becomes undeniable, who must wait, often for years, for the situation to reveal what they already knew. The lesson here is not that clarity is pointless. Cassandra's clarity was real, her prophecies were accurate. The lesson is about the relationship between knowing and power, and specifically that knowing something true does not automatically confer the power to act on it. This is a hard lesson. We tend to believe that truth is its own leverage, that if you know the right thing and say it clearly enough, the world will respond. Cassandra is what happens when that belief meets reality, and they do not agree. We are moving deeper now into the territory of Greek thought that deals not with individual stories but with the frameworks, the philosophical architectures that the Greeks built to make sense of the stories they kept telling themselves. These frameworks are not separate from the myths. They grew from the same soil. Plato was reading Homer. Aristotle was thinking about tragedy. The philosophers and the storytellers were in constant conversation, disagreeing with each other, borrowing from each other, trying to answer the same questions from different directions. Lesson 14. The Platonic forms and the problem of the real. Plato believed, and this is still one of the most influential philosophical positions in human history, more than 2,000 years after he formulated it, that the world we perceive through our senses is not the real world, it is a shadow of the real world. The real world is made of forms, perfect, eternal, unchanging archetypes of which everything in our experience is an imperfect copy. The chair you sit on is a copy of the form of chair. The beautiful person you love is an imperfect instantiation of the form of beauty. Justice, goodness, truth, these are not concepts that we abstract from experience. They are the originals of which experience is the copy, and they exist in a realm that our senses cannot reach, that only the intellect turned in the right direction can begin to apprehend. The allegory of the cave is the most famous expression of this idea. prisoners chained in a cave, seeing only the shadows of objects passing before a fire behind them, believing the shadows to be the whole of reality. When one prisoner is freed and turns to face the fire, the light that produces the shadows, the brightness is painful and confusing, and what the shadows seem to be no longer makes sense in the same way. When the prisoner is led further out of the cave and into sunlight, the adjustment is even more painful, even more disorienting. And when they return to the cave to tell the other prisoners what they saw, they are not believed and are considered damaged. Their eyes have been ruined by the outside light. They can no longer see the shadows as clearly as before. This story is usually taught as an epistemological theory, a theory about knowledge and reality. But I think it speaks to something much more personal, something you might have felt in your own life. Have you ever had an experience, a journey, a conversation, a book, a period of genuine solitude that changed what you could see, that made the world you came back to feel slightly less real or differently real than it had felt before? The adjustment works in both directions. Moving toward the light is painful and disorienting, but going back into the cave, knowing now that the shadows are shadows, that has its own peculiar pain. The gift of expanded perception is also the cost of being unable to unsee what you have seen. Once you know the shadows are shadows, you can never again simply watch them dance and believe they are everything. Lesson 15, Heraclitus and the river you cannot step into twice. Heraclitus was a pre-Socratic philosopher, meaning he came before Socrates, which is significant because the pre-Socratics were asking questions in a wilder, less organized way than what came later. They were not yet building systems. They were still hurling observations at the void and waiting to see what echoed back. Heraclitus believed that reality was fundamentally characterized by flux, by constant change, constant movement, constant becoming. Nothing is, everything is becoming. The fire is the most honest symbol he could find for reality, because fire is the thing that is entirely itself only while it is entirely changing. To freeze fire is to kill it, and what you are left with is not frozen fire but ash. His most famous fragment is the river observation. You cannot step into the same river twice, not because the river is different, though it is. The water has moved on, new water has arrived, the banks have shifted imperceptibly, but also because you are different. The you who steps in the second time is not the same you who stepped in the first time. Both the river and the self are processes, not things. They are verbs pretending to be nouns, and understanding this, really understanding it, not just intellectually acknowledging it, but feeling its truth in the way you feel the cold of river water, changes the way you experience time. Most of us are haunted by a fixed version of ourselves, a self that exists somewhere in the past, more real than who we are now, a self we are either trying to get back to or trying to justify our distance from. The Heraclitean insight disrupts this. There is no fixed self to return to. The person you were at 17, or at 22, or 5 years ago. That person was a process, and the process has moved on. The water has moved. What you can do is not return, but inhabit the current moment of the process fully, completely, with the understanding that this too will move, and the movement is not loss. There is grief in this, and I will not minimize the grief, but there is also something liberating in it that I want to name before we move on. If you are not a fixed thing but a process, then the person you are right now, with all the doubt and heaviness and uncertainty that accompanied you into this evening, is not a permanent condition. It is a river. It is moving. The specific configuration of difficulty you are currently experiencing has never existed before and will never exist again in exactly this form. You are in the middle of a current that is already, even now, carrying you somewhere. This does not mean the somewhere is certain or comfortable or what you would choose, but it is moving. You are moving, and movement Even painful movement is different from being stuck. Lesson 16. The Stoics and the radical proposal of indifference. The Stoic philosophers Zeno, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca built their entire philosophical system on a single radical distinction. There are things within our control, and there are things outside our control. Everything within our control belongs to the domain of virtue and is where our energy and attention should be directed. Everything outside our control is by definition outside our control, and spending our energy on it is not merely useless but actively harmful to the quality of our inner life. What is within your control? According to the Stoics, almost nothing that we typically spend most of our energy on. Not other people's opinions of you. Not what happens to your body. Not the success or failure of your projects. Not even, in the most radical versions of the Stoic position, your own emotions. At least not their initial arising. What is within your control is the response you make to what happens, the interpretation, the judgment, the choice of how to orient yourself to whatever arrives. This sounds either obvious or monstrous depending on your mood when you encounter it. It sounds obvious because we all know intellectually that we cannot control everything. It sounds monstrous because it seems to imply that suffering is always self-inflicted. That if you are in pain, it is because you are making incorrect judgments about what falls within the domain of the indifferent, and a wiser person would simply not suffer. This reading is too crude. The Stoics were not indifferent to suffering. Epictetus, who was born a slave and lived as a slave for a significant portion of his life, had personal reasons to be anything but indifferent. Marcus Aurelius watched his children die and fought a war he had never wanted and lived with chronic pain. Seneca was eventually forced to kill himself on Nero's orders. These were not comfortable people theorizing from comfortable positions. What they were describing was not the elimination of suffering, but the preservation of what they called the hegemonikon. The ruling faculty, the part of the mind that maintains its orientation regardless of what the world does. You can take my leg, Epictetus reportedly said. You cannot take my will. This is the distinction. The world takes many things. Some of what it takes is devastating, but there is a faculty that remains at the center of the person that the world cannot directly reach, can only be surrendered voluntarily. And surrendering it, the Stoics believed, was the one thing we should never do. Not for comfort, not for approval, not even for safety. Let the night ask you something here. Of the things that are weighing on you tonight, the specific, concrete concerns that are running in the background of your mind right now, which ones are within your control even partially, and which ones are outside your control entirely, and therefore belong by the Stoic account to the domain of the indifferent. This is not an instruction to stop caring about them. It is an invitation to notice how much of your energy is directed at things you cannot change, and whether that energy is producing anything except more exhaustion. Lesson 17. Penelope and the wisdom of patience as resistance. Odysseus is the hero of the Odyssey. It is his name in the title, his journey, his cleverness and suffering and long return. But there is an argument, quiet, persistent, worth making at least once. That Penelope is the more interesting figure. Odysseus spent 20 years away from Ithaca, 10 fighting at Troy and 10 trying to get home. Penelope spent those 20 years at home, surrounded by suitors who wanted to marry her and claim Odysseus's kingdom, managing a household, raising a son, maintaining the fiction that her husband might yet return. She kept the suitors at bay with a particular deception. She was weaving a burial shroud for Odysseus's father Laertes, and she told the suitors she would choose one of them when the shroud was finished. And each night, she unraveled what she had woven during the day. This is usually read as a clever trick, a woman buying herself time by a technical deception. But I want to suggest it is something more. Penelope's weaving and unweaving is a portrait of a specific kind of intelligence, not the brilliant, flashy, get-out-of-a-monster's cave intelligence of Odysseus, but a slower, deeper intelligence that operates through endurance, through the capacity to sustain a position under pressure, without the support of the narrative being about you, without anyone noticing your cleverness, without any acknowledgement that what you are doing is extraordinary. Every night she undid what she had done. Every morning she began again, and this sustained what needed to be sustained until the moment could be met. There is a kind of work in life that looks like nothing is happening. The patient rebuilding of something broken, the slow accumulation of the conditions that will eventually make a different kind of action possible, the maintenance of a position under sustained pressure from people who want you to give it up. Penelope embodies this work, and she does it without glamour, without recognition, without the consolation of being the named hero of the story she was living inside. Odysseus gets the poem, Penelope gets the wisdom. This seems like an unfair trade, and it is. And it is also one of the most honest portraits in ancient literature of what real strength sometimes looks like. Lesson 18. Demeter and the seasonality of grief. Demeter was the goddess of the harvest, of grain, of the fertile earth that produces what sustains human life. When her daughter Persephone was taken by Hades into the underworld, Demeter ceased her work. The earth stopped producing. Winter arrived, not as a seasonal change, but as a direct expression of divine grief. The crops failed, animals starved, humanity began to perish. The earth itself was in mourning. Eventually a compromise was reached. Persephone would spend part of the year in the underworld with Hades, and part of the year on earth with her mother, and this arrangement, dividing the year between the realm of the living and the realm of the dead, became the explanation for the seasons. Winter is when Demeter grieves. Spring is when she is reunited. The cycle of the natural world is, in this myth, a cycle of grief and reunion, loss and return, death and reemergence. There is something in this myth that speaks to the rhythm of the inner life in a way that is rarely named. Grief has seasons, it is not static. It is not something that arrives and then, if you do everything correctly, diminishes at a steady, predictable rate until it is gone. It has its own rhythm, its own cycles, its own winter and spring. There are times when the ground of the inner life simply does not produce, when everything that usually sustains you has stopped working, when the well is dry and the fields are bare and no effort seems to reach whatever it is that makes growth possible. And there are times when the ground softens again unexpectedly and things grow that you had stopped expecting to grow. The wisdom in Demeter's myth is not a technique for managing grief, it is a permission, the mythological authorization to acknowledge that winter happens, that it is real, that it is not a personal failure, and that the earth does not apologize for its seasons. You do not have to apologize for yours. The winter of your inner life is as real as any other winter. And Demeter, standing at the surface of the earth with her hands empty and the sky gray, is not a portrait of weakness. It is a portrait of love so deep it can stop the world. And that winter, however long it lasts, does not last forever. Persephone always comes back, not unchanged. No one returns from the underworld unchanged, but back. And the earth remembers how to grow. Lesson 19. The fates and the question of destiny. The three Moirai, Clotho, who spins the thread of life, Lachesis, who measures it, and Atropos, who cuts it, were among the most frightening figures in Greek religion, precisely because they were not subject to the other gods. Even Zeus could not override the fates. Even Apollo's prophecies were the reading of what the fates had already decided. The thread was spun at birth. The measure was determined. The cutting would come when it came. This sounds like the most depressing possible worldview. Total determinism. The removal of all meaningful choice. The reduction of human life to a puppet show. But the Greeks were more sophisticated than that. And here is the sophistication. The existence of the fates did not, in Greek thought, eliminate responsibility or the significance of choice. It coexisted with both. This is logically paradoxical, and the Greeks were comfortable with the paradox, which is one of the things I find most admirable about them. They could hold the belief that certain things were fated and also believe that character is destiny, that how you respond to what is fated matters, that the quality of consciousness you bring to your life shapes what that life becomes, even inside whatever constraints the fates have established. The Stoic position on this is interesting. Act as if your choices matter, because the only alternative is paralysis, and paralysis is worse. Even if everything is determined, the determined action includes your response to it. You are part of the mechanism. Your deliberation is part of what produces the outcome. This is not a clean, logical resolution, and the Stoics knew it. But it is a livable position, which is what philosophy needs to be when it descends from the seminar room into the actual texture of a human life. Lesson 20. Hephaestus and the beauty built by the ugly. Hephaestus was the smith god, the craftsman of Olympus, the maker of weapons for gods and artifacts of extraordinary power. He was also lame, either from birth or from being thrown off Olympus by one parent or the other, depending on which version of the myth you follow. He was ugly by the standards of Olympus, which were the standards of perfect embodied radiance, and he was married to Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty, who was unfaithful to him continuously with Ares, the beautiful god of war. He knew. He built a net of extraordinary delicacy and trapped them in it and exposed them to the laughter of the other gods, and then he released them, because even the brilliant trap could not give him what the situation fundamentally denied him. The myth of Hephaestus is the myth of the person who makes beautiful things while not being by conventional standards beautiful, who creates what others desire while not being themselves desired in the way they desire to be desired, who has genuine, extraordinary gifts, gifts acknowledged by everyone, gods and mortals alike, and who nonetheless lives with a wound that the gifts cannot heal. This is a very human situation, dressed in divine clothing, and the Greeks told the story without resolving it, which is the honest thing to do. Hephaestus is not redeemed by his craft. His craft is magnificent, and his personal grief is also real. These coexist, both are true. The lesson is not, your gifts will make up for your wounds. Sometimes they do not. But the gifts are still worth having. The craft is still worth practicing. The net that catches Ares and Aphrodite is still one of the most sophisticated things ever made in the world of the myth, regardless of whether it gave Hephaestus what he actually wanted. What we make, and how we make it, and the devotion with which we make it, has a value that exists independently of whether it delivers the specific consolation we hoped it would deliver. This is a lesson that contains grief, but it also contains something that functions, if you hold it long enough, as a kind of dignity. We are perhaps an hour into this journey now, or perhaps you have drifted for a while and returned. That is perfectly fine. The night is long. There is no urgency. Let the ideas settle the way sediment settles in still water, finding their level, arranging themselves in the way they will need to arrange themselves for any of this to become useful rather than merely interesting. What follows now is the part of the conversation that goes slightly deeper. Not darker, not heavier in the way that exhausts, but deeper in the way that a well goes deep. More honest, more willing to look at the things that live below the surface of what we usually allow ourselves to think. The ancient Greeks told a story about a man named Oedipus that Sigmund Freud found so useful he built an entire theory of psychology around it, or at least around a particular reading of it. The reading Freud focused on was the sexual one, and there is something to it, but it misses the larger truth that the Greeks were actually after. Oedipus was told by the oracle at Delphi that he would kill his father and marry his mother. Horrified, He fled from the people he believed to be his parents in order to prevent the prophecy from coming true. In fleeing from the prophecy, he ran directly toward its fulfillment. He killed a man at a crossroads, his real father, whom he did not recognize. He married a woman and became king, his real mother, whom neither of them recognized. The prophecy was fulfilled not despite his efforts to prevent it, but through them. Lesson 21. The thing you run from has a way of meeting you at the next crossroads. This is the deepest truth in the Oedipus myth, and it is the one that survives all the various readings, including Freud's "what you flee, you tend toward. What you refuse to examine, you tend to enact." The psychological mechanism is recognizable even without the language of mythology. The person who is abandoned as a child and spends their adult life choosing partners who cannot commit, creating the abandonment again in a different form. The person who watched a parent struggle with addiction and approaches their own relationship with certain substances in ways they would have predicted as impossible. Not because they are weak or foolish or cursed, but because the thing that was not addressed found another door. The oracle did not cause Oedipus's fate. The oracle merely described what was already in motion. What was already in motion was the combination of his nature, his particular kind of pride, his instinct to flee rather than face, and the forces of the world he was born into. His fate was not arbitrary. It was the shape his specific self, moving through specific circumstances, was always going to make. This is not determinism in the brutal sense. It is something more nuanced. The recognition that who you are, when not examined, tends to reproduce itself in the circumstances it creates, which means that self-examination, the uncomfortable, ongoing, often inconvenient practice of actually looking at what you're doing and why, is not vanity. It is something close to necessity. Lesson 22. Medea and the destruction wrought by betrayed love. Medea helped Jason obtain the Golden Fleece. She used her abilities as a sorceress. She betrayed her own family. She killed her brother to delay pursuit. She gave up everything she had for a man she loved and who she believed loved her. And when Jason, years later, decided to leave her for a politically advantageous marriage to the Princess of Corinth, she did what the myths say she did, which is one of the most disturbing acts in all of Greek literature. She killed her own children to take from Jason the thing he loved most, to ensure his punishment could not be recovered from. I want to be careful with this story because it is easy to be glib about it in either direction, either dismissing Medea as a monster which loses the truth the Greeks were pointing toward, or romanticizing her grief in a way that ignores what she actually did. The Greeks told this story as a tragedy, not as an endorsement. Tragedies are not endorsements. They are the artistic examination of how things go wrong, not wrong in a random way, but wrong in a way that follows from who people are and what they want and the forces that shape their choices. What the story of Medea examines is the particular violence of feeling used, of having given everything, genuinely, completely, and having had that gift treated as a transaction rather than a covenant. Medea's love was real. Jason's betrayal was real. The consequences were real, and what the story asks in its tragic structure is not what Medea should have done differently. That question has a clear answer, and the play is not interested in it. But what happens to a person when the deepest investment of their life is treated as disposable? What happens to the self when the self has been given away and the recipient simply decides they want something else? This is a very old question, and it has no resolution, which is why Euripides wrote it as tragedy rather than philosophy. The lesson embedded in Medea is not love less, not protect yourself from the beginning. It is something more honest and more painful. Some loves are structured by an imbalance of sacrifice that is not visible at the beginning, and the imbalance does its damage slowly, and the discovery of it arrives after the most irreversible commitments have already been made. This is not a comfortable lesson. It is the kind of lesson that the Greeks did not flinch from and which most contemporary culture prefers to route around, because we have decided that love should be straightforward, and if it isn't, it is because someone did something wrong. The Greeks knew better. Love is rarely straightforward, and the wreckage of Medea is, among other things, a portrait of what happens when straightforwardness is demanded of something that was never simple. Let the night be honest with you now. Let something that has been quiet in the background of your thinking come slightly forward. Not all the way. There is no need for all the way, but enough that you can acknowledge it is there. Lesson 23. The Symposium and the Ladder of Love. We touched on Plato's Symposium earlier when we discussed Eros. Let us go back to it, because there is more there. Diotima, the woman whose wisdom Socrates claims to transmit, does not only describe what Eros is, she also describes a process, a kind of ascent, through which a person's love can develop from its most specific and personal form to something that she calls the beautiful itself. The ladder begins with the love of a particular beautiful body. Then the recognition that beauty of body is found in many bodies, not only one, and the love expands to encompass the form rather than the individual. Then the recognition that beauty of mind is more valuable than beauty of body, and the love shifts accordingly. Then the beauty found in practices and laws, then the beauty of knowledge itself, and finally, and this is where Diotima gets genuinely strange and magnificent, the vision of the beautiful itself. Beauty is a principle, eternal, unchanging, the thing that all particular beautiful things participate in without exhausting. You do not have to believe in Platonic forms to find this ladder useful. You can strip the metaphysics away, and what remains is still interesting. Love as a practice that can be educated, that can grow in scope, that can shift from the specific and personal to something broader without losing its essential quality of being genuine desire. A person who begins by loving one person can, if they are attentive, come to love what that person represents, a quality, a way of being, and then come to love that quality wherever it appears, and then come to love the world that contains and produces that quality. This is not a diminishment of the original love. It is its education, and it suggests that the restlessness that often follows deep love, the feeling that even the love you have for the person closest to you is reaching towards something that no particular person can fully satisfy, is not infidelity and is not ingratitude. It is Eros being honest about its nature. Lesson 24. Ajax and the pride that could not survive its wound. Ajax was one of the greatest warriors at Troy. Some accounts say the greatest, after Achilles. Strong, relentless, dependable in a crisis in a way that more complicated heroes were not. When Achilles died, his divine armor, made by Hephaestus, naturally was to be awarded to the greatest Greek warrior. Ajax expected it. He had earned it, and it went to Odysseus, who had not earned it in the same physical sense, but who was cleverer, more articulate, better at the politics of honor. Ajax, who could survive any battle, could not survive this. He went mad. In the madness, he slaughtered a flock of sheep under the illusion that they were his enemies. When clarity returned and he understood what he had done, he could not endure the shame. He fell on his sword. There is a failure mode available to people of great strength and genuine achievement, a failure mode that is specifically enabled by the strength. The failure is the inability to metabolize being bested. Ajax could fight anything. Ajax could not lose, not because he was arrogant. The Greeks drew a careful distinction between the arrogance that courts disaster, hubris, and the pride that accompanies genuine excellence. Ajax's pride was not hubris, it was real. His achievement was real. But real achievement does not protect you from being bested by someone with a different set of gifts. And real pride does not always protect you from what that besting reveals about the shape of your limitations. The lesson in Ajax is not be humble. It is Develop a relationship with your limitations that does not require them to not exist. The person of genuine excellence, and Ajax was exactly that, still has the full range of human limitations, still has things they cannot do, still can lose, still can be bested by someone who has gifts they lack. The capacity to hold your strength and your limitation in the same honest account of yourself, without the limitation canceling the strength, and without the strength denying the limitation. This is a specific kind of maturity that very strong people often reach last, if they reach it at all. Because strength for a long time does the work that could be done by maturity, and the lesson does not arrive until the strength alone proves insufficient. Lesson 25. Tiresias and the knowledge that comes from living on both sides. Tiresias was a Theban prophet who, in some versions of the myth, had spent time as both a man and a woman, transformed by the gods during a dispute about the relative pleasure of male and female experience. He lived on both sides of that divide for years, and when he was returned to one, he carried the knowledge of both. He was blind, struck blind by Hera, or compensated with blindness by Zeus as the price of his gift, depending on the version, and in the darkness he could see what others with eyes could not. The figure of Tiresias appears in an astonishing number of Greek plays: Oedipus Rex, the Bacchae, Antigone. He is the one who knows what the audience knows, who can see the shape of what is coming while the characters around him remain in the darkness of their ignorance. And nobody ever listens to him, which is the structural tragedy embedded in the character. The person with the widest sight is always slightly outside the action, slightly unable to intervene effectively, slightly fated to watch others walk into what they could have avoided. The lesson here is double. First, the widest sight often comes from having lived on multiple sides of an experience, from having been in multiple positions, from having lost what you once had and found what you did not expect, from the involuntary education that loss and change and the violation of your expectations provide. Second, that the kind of seeing that this education produces is not always translatable into the currency of action. Knowing is not doing. Seeing is not changing. And the particular grief of wisdom is sometimes precisely this, that it arrives in time to understand but not in time to intervene, or arrives with the understanding but not the capacity to make the understanding land in the person who most needs to hear it. Lesson 26. The oracle at Delphi and the philosophy of know thyself. The most famous inscription at the temple of Apollo at Delphi was this: Gnothi Surton, know thyself. Socrates made this the foundation of his philosophical practice. It seems simple. It is one of the most demanding instructions ever given to a human being, because the self is not a fixed object that can be examined once and filed away. It is a process, Heraclitean, moving, constantly arriving and departing. And knowing it requires continuous attention, not a single examination. What does it mean to know yourself? The Greeks had several proposals. It means knowing your limits, knowing where your competence ends and hubris begins. It means knowing your tendencies, the specific ways your character inclines you toward particular errors and particular gifts. It means knowing the difference between what you want and what you have been taught to want. It means knowing the shape of your fear, which fears are appropriate responses to real danger, and which are the accumulated anxieties of a history that is no longer quite as relevant as it once was. It means knowing what you value, not in the abstract declarative sense of values you would write on a form, but in the revealed preference sense. What you actually spend your time and attention and energy on, which is always more honest about your values than what you say you value. None of this is comfortable. The instruction to know yourself is not an invitation to admiration. It is an invitation to accuracy. And accuracy about the self is one of the most demanding things a person can pursue, because the self is not neutral about being examined. It has strong preferences about what is seen and strong habits of concealment about what it would rather not face. Lesson 27. Prometheus bound and the ethics of suffering. We spoke of Prometheus earlier, the theft of fire, the punishment, the regenerating liver. Let us go back one more time, because the Aeschylus play Prometheus Bound does something with the myth that makes it much more than a story of punishment. In the play, Prometheus does not repent. He is chained to his rock in agony, and he argues he is defiant. He knows that Zeus will eventually need him. There is a prophecy that Prometheus knows and Zeus does not, about who will dethrone him. And Prometheus holds that knowledge as his only leverage. He does not submit, he does not break, and he does not pretend that his suffering is deserved. This matters in a tradition that often uses suffering as divine instruction. The gods send suffering as a corrective, and the appropriate response is recognition, remorse, adjustment. Prometheus stands apart as a figure who suffers without it being his fault and knows it, and says so and does not accept the suffering as a verdict on his character. He did something good. He is being punished for it. He has not confused the punishment with justice. This is a form of psychological integrity that is actually quite rare and quite difficult. The capacity to suffer without concluding that you deserve the suffering, without internalizing the punishment as a verdict, without the suffering eroding your sense of your own worth. We live in a culture that has complicated relationships with this capacity. We tend, on one hand, toward the belief that suffering must be deserved, that there is a moral logic to difficulty, that if things are hard, it is because of something you did wrong. On the other hand, we tend toward the opposite error, the belief that suffering is always meaningless, always unjust, always evidence of a system that has failed you. Both positions are too simple. Prometheus shows us a third option. Suffering can be real and unjust, and still be navigated without loss of self. Not by pretending it doesn't hurt, not by pretending it is meaningful when it isn't, but by maintaining a clear distinction between what the world does to you and what you are. Lesson 28. The Bacchae and the danger of refusing Dionysus. The Bacchae is perhaps the strangest and most disturbing play in the Greek canon. Euripides wrote it near the end of his life, and it feels like the culmination of something, a reckoning with questions he had been circling for decades. The play concerns the arrival of Dionysus in Thebes and the refusal of the king Pentheus to acknowledge his divinity. Pentheus is a man of pure Apollonian order, rational, controlled, deeply invested in the proper structure of society. Dionysus represents everything outside that order: ecstasy, intoxication, the dissolution of the individual ego into something larger, the nighttime rites of women in the mountains, the temporary suspension of all the categories that civilization maintains. Pentheus refuses to allow any of it. The consequences of his refusal are catastrophic. The Bacchantes, the women of Thebes, including his own mother Agave, go to the mountains in Dionysian ecstasy and tear Pentheus apart when he goes to spy on them. Agave carries his head back to Thebes, believing it is the head of a lion, in her divine madness. It is one of the most horrifying scenes in ancient literature, and the play does not straightforwardly condemn Dionysus. It does not say the god was wrong to drive them mad, and Pentheus was right to try to maintain order. It says something much more uncomfortable, that the refusal of Dionysus, the refusal to acknowledge what is wild and excessive and beyond rational control in the human psyche, has its own violence, its own madness. And eventually the thing refused breaks through in a form that is far more destructive than it would have been if it had been given its proper place. The lesson in the Bacchae is one of the most important lessons in all of Greek tragedy, and it is especially important tonight, in this particular cultural moment. We live in a world that is extremely good at Apollonian structure, at rational organization, at scheduled productivity, at the optimization of time and attention toward measurable outcomes, we are somewhat less good at giving Dionysus his due, at acknowledging the parts of ourselves that do not want to be optimized, that want to be lost for a while, that need the temporary dissolution of all the categories we spend the rest of our lives maintaining. The refused God does not simply go away. He goes underground, and when he returns in a form that is no longer possible to manage. This is a description of certain kinds of breakdown. Personal breakdown, cultural breakdown. That is as accurate as any psychological account I have encountered. Lesson 29. Antigone and the conflict between divine law and human law. Antigone is Sophocles' masterpiece, and it concerns a problem that has not been resolved in the 2.5 millennia since it was written. What do you do when the law of the state and the law of conscience are in direct conflict? Creon has decreed that the body of Polynices, Antigone's brother who died fighting against Thebes, must not be buried. He was a traitor. His punishment extends beyond death. Antigone knows that this violates divine law, which requires the dead to be given proper burial rites. She buries her brother anyway. Creon has her walled up in a cave. She dies. Creon's son, her betrothed, kills himself. Creon's wife kills herself. Creon is left with the consequences of his absolute adherence to the law he made. The play does not tell you that Antigone was right and Creon was wrong. It is more honest than that. Creon has genuine arguments. A state that cannot enforce its laws is not a state. A ruler who makes exceptions to his own decrees because a woman with strong feelings pressures him to is a ruler who has announced that his decrees are negotiable. These are real arguments. Antigone also has genuine arguments. There are obligations that exist prior to the state that the state cannot legitimately abolish by decree. The duty to care for the dead is one of the most ancient human obligations. It predates politics, predates law, predates almost everything we call civilization. These are also real arguments. The play holds them in tension. It does not resolve them. It lets the collision produce its tragedy and then stands in the wreckage without offering a verdict. The lesson of Antigone is not always follow divine law, not always follow the state. It is the collision between different kinds of legitimate authority is real, and it is not always possible to honor both, and the choice between them has consequences that you cannot always foresee. And bearing those consequences is the price of having chosen. This is not a comfortable lesson, but it is an honest one, and it is relevant in a world that continues to produce these collisions in different forms, different authorities, different competing obligations. And where the temptation to pretend the collision doesn't exist, or that one side is obviously correct, persists despite all the evidence that it produces its own catastrophes. Lesson 30. The wine-dark sea and the acceptance of what cannot be controlled. Homer's description of the Mediterranean as wine-dark, oinos pontos, the wine-colored deep, is one of the most enduring phrases in ancient literature, and its strangeness has puzzled scholars for centuries. The sea is not wine-colored, not by any ordinary observation. The scholarly explanations range from a peculiarity of ancient Greek color perception to a poetic convention to a specific quality of light at certain hours on certain days in the Aegean. But whatever its origin, the phrase creates a specific atmosphere, a sea that is not merely geographical but tonally particular, that carries a quality of depth and weight and something slightly ominous in its beauty. Odysseus sailed that wine-dark sea for 10 years. He was blown off course by storms he did not cause and could not control. He was detained by goddesses who loved him. He was trapped in the cave of a one-eyed monster who was incidentally the son of the god of the sea, which meant that the god whose domain he was crossing was actively hostile to his return. He survived through intelligence, through resilience, through the kindness of strangers who sheltered him, and through the support of a goddess, Athena, who found him interesting, and advocated for him when she could. What I want to notice about Odysseus's journey is not the cleverness, though the cleverness is real, but the acceptance, in a way that seems counterintuitive for someone who is constantly scheming and planning and working to get home. Odysseus is also someone who accepts, moment by moment, what he cannot change. He does not waste his time being indignant about the unfairness of Poseidon's wrath. He does not collapse into self-pity when he loses all his men and arrives alone and shipwrecked on a strange shore. He takes stock of where he is. He identifies what is available. He moves forward from there. This combination, deep resourcefulness paired with acceptance of what the gods have decided, is not passivity and is not resignation. It is a specific form of intelligence about what is and is not within human power. And it is the thing that finally gets Odysseus home while his less adaptable companions do not survive. We are approaching the midpoint of our journey tonight, and I want to do something a little different before we continue. I want to ask you something that you might not have been asked in a while, not rhetorically, genuinely, of everything you have encountered in this first portion of the evening. The myths, the philosophical fragments, the images and the arguments and the quiet moments between them. What has landed? What has touched something that was already there waiting to be touched? It does not have to be dramatic. It might be something small, an image, a phrase, a way of putting something that suddenly made a familiar experience feel slightly more legible to you. Whatever it is, hold it. We will use it later. The second half of our journey begins now. In the second half of anything real, any journey, any argument, any relationship that is actually going somewhere tends to move differently from the first. The first half is expansion, the second half is depth. In the first half, you are covering territory. In the second half, you are beginning to understand the territory you covered. The ground does not change, but your relationship to it does. You know where you have been now. You have some sense of the direction you're moving in. And the questions you're carrying feel slightly different than they did at the beginning. More specific, perhaps? More particular? More yours? Let us talk about something that the Greeks understood with a clarity that we have partially lost, which is the relationship between the individual and the community. The Greek polis, the city-state, was not merely a political arrangement. It was, according to Aristotle, the natural condition of human flourishing. His exact words were that the human being is a political animal, a zoon politikon, which is often translated as a social or political creature, and which means something specific, that to be fully human, in the sense of exercising your full capacities, you need the context of a community. The hermit philosopher who retreats entirely from human society is either a beast or a god, Aristotle said, either less than human or more than human. The ordinary human being needs other people not as a luxury, but as a condition of their full development. Lesson 31. The tension between individuality and community is not resolvable but navigable. Aristotle's claim that community is necessary for flourishing does not mean that community is always healthy, or that belonging to a community requires suppressing what makes you specific and different and irreducibly yourself. The Greeks understood this tension. Their drama is largely about it, the collision between the individual and the demands of the collective, between what Antigone owes to her family and what she owes to Thebes, between what Achilles owes to the Greek army and what he owes to his own sense of honor. These are not resolved in the plays. They are dramatized. The dramatization is itself the point, because the truth is that there is no permanent resolution. There is only the ongoing negotiation. The daily, lived, non-theoretical process of being both a distinct self and a member of something larger than yourself. This is relevant to the particular loneliness of the present historical moment. We live in a time of extraordinary connectivity, more connected in the measurable sense than any human beings who have ever lived, and also in a time of what can only be described as deep collective loneliness. The connections we have are numerous and they are very often shallow, and the shallowness is not an accident. It is produced by the specific kind of connection that the tools of the present moment optimize for. Not intimacy, not mutual vulnerability, not the kind of sustained, imperfect, evolving relationship that produces the conditions in which a person can actually be known, but contact, acknowledgement. The brief exchange that confirms your existence without asking very much of it. This is not the polis. It is something much thinner, and it produces something much thinner, and the hunger for what the polis provided persists even in people who would not know to call it by that name. Lesson 32. Friendship as philosophy. Aristotle wrote about friendship, philia, at greater length and with greater seriousness than almost any other topic in his ethical philosophy. He identified three kinds: friendships of utility in which two people benefit each other, practically friendships of pleasure in which two people enjoy each other's company, and friendships of virtue, in which two people recognize in each other a quality of character that they genuinely admire and whose relationship becomes over time a kind of mutual cultivation of excellence. Only the third kind, Aristotle argued, is true friendship. The other two are friendship in name only. They are real and valuable, but they do not rise to the level of what he means by philia in its fullest sense. A friendship of virtue in Aristotle's account is rare. It requires both people to be at a particular level of moral and intellectual development, and it takes time. He says that you cannot be close friends with someone you met yesterday, which is a claim that feels counterintuitive in a culture that cultivates rapid intimacy, but which reflects something real about the difference between feeling connected and being known. Real friendship requires the accumulation of shared experience, the evidence of how someone behaves in difficult circumstances, the knowledge of their particular way of failing and recovering, the history that makes the present moment comprehensible. You cannot have that with someone you met yesterday. You can have warmth with them, interest, attraction of various kinds. You cannot have the thing Aristotle means by friendship in its highest form. The scarcity of this kind of friendship in contemporary life is one of the unspoken griefs of our moment. Many people in their late 20s and 30s quietly discover that the friendships of their earlier years, formed in the contexts of school and shared living, and the particular closeness that comes from physical proximity and unscheduled time, have not been replicated in adult life, where proximity is rarer and time is scheduled, and the vulnerability required to form close bonds is increasingly economically inconvenient. This is not a personal failure. It is a structural problem, produced by the specific way adult life in wealthy societies tends to be organized. But structural problems are still experienced personally, in the specific ache of evenings spent alone with the dim awareness that you are less known than you would like to be. Lesson 33. Achilles and the philosophy of glory. Achilles presents one of the oldest and clearest portraits in Western literature of a man who has made a definitive choice about what matters most. He was offered a choice by the fates, or at least by his divine mother Thetis, who had access to the knowledge of his destiny. He could live long and quietly and be forgotten, or he could go to Troy, die young, and be remembered forever. He chose glory. He chose the short life and the eternal name, and he pursued that choice with a consistency that is almost inhuman in its singleness of purpose and with the specific kind of suffering that such singleness produces. Because a life organized entirely around glory is a life in which everything that is not glory is a threat to the project. His withdrawal from the war after Agamemnon dishonored him is usually read as sulking. The greatest warrior in Greece, pouting in his tent while his friends die. This reading misses what is actually happening. Achilles withdrew because Agamemnon took his prize, Briseis, and in doing so demonstrated that Achilles' glory, his honor, the social recognition that was the point of the whole enterprise, could be taken from him by someone with more power, regardless of his achievement. If the glory can be taken, what is it worth? What has he been trading his life for? This is not sulking. This is a genuine philosophical crisis. The moment when the principle around which a life has been organized is revealed to be less stable than it was assumed to be, that crisis is available to anyone. The specific glory you have organized your life around may be different from Achilles's, but the moment when its foundation shows a crack, when the thing you have been working toward is revealed to be fragile, contingent, dependent on forces outside your control, has the same structure regardless of the content. Lesson 34. The death of Patroclus and the geography of grief. Patroclus, Achilles' closest companion, and in some readings, his beloved in the deepest sense, went to war wearing Achilles' armor while Achilles refused to fight. To inspire the Greeks and frighten the Trojans, he was killed by Hector. And Achilles' grief for Patroclus is one of the most complete portraits of grief in all of literature. Not composed, not philosophical, not mediated by any of the frameworks that literature usually provides for the management of extreme emotion. Raw, animal, the kind of grief that does not care about consequences and does not calculate, that simply occupies the person entirely, allowing nothing else to exist alongside it. What is philosophically interesting about Achilles' grief is that it is the thing that finally moves him, not the war, not the cause, not his own glory, which was the thing that had organized his entire existence. The death of the person he loved most moves him back into action. And that action, his return to the war, his killing of Hector, the entire third movement of the Iliad, is not about glory anymore. It is about grief expressed as violence. There is something very honest about this portrait of how grief functions in the psyche of someone who has built their self entirely around a principle other than love. The love was always there. The grief reveals it and what it produces. The final furious humanized Achilles who gives Hector's father Priam the body of his dead son is the most human version of Achilles we ever see. Stripped of his divine armor and his philosophical program, he is just a person who loved someone and lost him and does not know what to do with that. Lesson 35. The Stoic Epictetus and freedom from the inside. We mentioned Epictetus earlier, but I want to return to him more carefully, because his story is too important to skip over quickly. He was born a slave in Hierapolis in what is now Turkey, probably in the middle of the 1st century CE. He was the property of a man named Epaphroditus, who worked for the Emperor Nero. There is a story, probably legendary but instructive regardless, that Epaphroditus once twisted Epictetus's leg to demonstrate something about pain and endurance. Epictetus reportedly said calmly, "If you continue, you will break it." Epaphroditus continued. The leg broke. Epictetus said, "I told you so." Whether or not this story is literally true, it captures something true about the philosophical position. Epictetus developed and taught after he was freed and established a school in Nicopolis. His central claim was simple and absolute. The only thing that is truly yours is your response to what happens. The body can be enslaved. The name can be changed. The circumstances can be controlled entirely by another person, but the faculty of assent, the part of the mind that decides how to interpret and respond to what is experienced, that cannot be taken. It can only be surrendered. This is a philosophical position born from the most extreme circumstances of unfreedom, and its power comes precisely from that origin. When someone who has been a slave tells you that freedom is an interior condition, they are not speaking from comfort or privilege or the position of someone who has never had to test the proposition. They are speaking from the sharpest possible edge of the human situation. And what they found there, in the most stripped-down version of existence available to a human being, was that something remained that could not be taken. That finding is not consolation for injustice. Epictetus was also clear that slavery was wrong, that the system that produced it was wrong. But his philosophy was not principally about political conditions. It was about the only conditions that any individual can actually work with, the conditions of their own mind. Lesson 36. Marcus Aurelius and the public man with a private philosophy. Marcus Aurelius was, by any external measure, one of the most powerful human beings who has ever lived. He was the emperor of Rome for almost 20 years, ruler of the largest empire in the Western world, with absolute authority over the lives of millions of people. He was also, privately, a Stoic philosopher who wrote one of the most remarkable texts in the history of self-examination, the Meditations, which he wrote not for publication but for himself, a journal, a practice, the private philosophical work of a man who spent his days in public exercise of enormous power and his private hours arguing with himself about whether he was living correctly. The Meditations are full of self-admonishment. He tells himself to wake up, to stop wasting time, to remember that he is mortal, to treat the people around him with the patience he would want treated with himself, to remember that the anger he feels at their stupidity or selfishness would look to an observer with a wider perspective, very much like the stupidity and selfishness he is angry at. He is not writing a philosophical treatise. He is working on himself with the full knowledge that the work is endless and the progress unguaranteed. He was also, by most historical accounts, genuinely good at his job. One of the more just and capable emperors Rome produced, though the standard is not especially demanding. And the Meditations are part of what produced that goodness. The private work of philosophy made the public exercise of power slightly less likely to be the exercise of unchecked ego. What moves me most about Marcus Aurelius is not the philosophy itself, which is largely derived from Epictetus, whose slave's wisdom he spent years absorbing, but the fact that he kept writing. He kept returning to the same arguments, the same reminders, the same exercises, year after year. He did not arrive at equanimity and then stop practicing. He practiced the way a musician practices scales, not because scales are the music, but because the music is not possible without them, and the facility fades without maintenance, and there is no version of the practice where you have finished and can put it down. He was the most powerful man in the world, and he kept writing reminders to himself to be better. This is not weakness. It is the opposite of weakness. It is what the practice of philosophy looks like from the inside, rather than the outside. Lesson 37. The Epicureans and the radical simplicity of pleasure. The Epicureans are usually misunderstood, probably more thoroughly misunderstood than any other ancient philosophical school. Epicurean in contemporary usage means someone who enjoys fine dining and luxury and the pleasures of cultivated experience. The actual philosophy of Epicurus was almost entirely opposite. Epicurus and his followers lived simply, communally in a garden outside Athens, eating bread and olives and drinking water, occasionally cheese on a feast day. Their claim was not that pleasure was wrong, but that the pleasures most people pursue actually produce more pain than pleasure when the full accounting is done. Epicurus identified two basic conditions of the good life: ataraxia, which is freedom from mental disturbance, a kind of deep calm, and aponia, which is freedom from physical pain. That's it. Not wealth, not status, not the accumulation of experiences or the expansion of pleasure beyond its simplest form. The goal was the elimination of unnecessary suffering. And most human suffering in the Epicurean view was unnecessary, produced not by actual conditions of life, but by the anxieties generated by wanting things that are not necessary and fearing things that are not as bad as they seem. Epicurus was particularly interested in the fear of death, which he considered the primary source of unnecessary human suffering, the fear that distorted so many lives, driving people toward the accumulation of wealth and power and protection that they believed would insulate them from mortality. His solution to the fear of death was philosophical and still strikes me as quietly devastating in its simplicity. When death is, you are not. When you are, death is not. There is no moment in which you and death are both present. Therefore, there is nothing to fear, because there is no experience of death. There is only the end of experience. The terror we attach to it is attached to an illusion, whether or not you find this argument convincing. And it has been contested and refined and argued about for 2,500 years. The underlying question it raises is worth sitting with tonight. How much of the way you live your life is organized around the management of fear rather than the cultivation of what actually makes life feel worth living? How much of what you work for is really a hedge against something bad happening rather than an investment in something genuinely good? Epicurus would say, the hedge never works, and the investment usually does, and the confusion between them is one of the fundamental errors of ordinary human life. Lesson 38. Thucydides and the unchanging nature of human conflict. Thucydides wrote the history of the Peloponnesian War, the war between Athens and Sparta that lasted 27 years and effectively destroyed the civilization that had produced what we most admire about ancient Greece. He wrote it as the war happened, as a participant and a witness, after being exiled from Athens for a military failure that was probably not entirely his fault. He made a remarkable claim for an ancient historian that his account would be a possession for all time, useful to anyone who wished to understand the nature of events, because human nature is constant, and the patterns of how human beings and cities and civilizations behave under certain conditions recur and will recur as long as human nature remains what it is. The lesson in Thucydides is not that history repeats itself. That phrase is too simple, and Thucydides was not simple. The lesson is that the basic drives, the desire for power, the fear of losing power, the way fear produces aggression, the way aggression produces the conditions for further conflict, the way strong powers treat weaker ones, the way ordinary citizens suffer the consequences of decisions made by people with more power than wisdom. These do not change. The technology changes. The specific issues change. The languages and the dress and the particular justifications offered for particular actions change. But the structure of the drama is recognizable across centuries, and studying it carefully is not an academic exercise. It is the development of a capacity for pattern recognition that might be one of the most practically useful things a person can have. Lesson 39. The impossibility of neutrality. There is a moment in Thucydides' history that is so famous it has a name: the Melian dialogue. The Athenians have arrived at the small island of Melos and demanded its submission. The Melians argue that they should be left in peace. They are neutral. They wish no harm to anyone. They simply wish to continue their existence as they have been. The Athenians respond with one of the most chilling passages in ancient writing. The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. Questions of justice arise only between equals, where power is unequal. Power determines the outcome, and the Melians should stop confusing what they wish were true with what is actually true. The Melians do not submit. They resist, they are defeated, the men are killed, the women and children are enslaved. The island is repopulated with Athenian colonists. This happened. This is history, not myth. And the Athenians who did it were the inheritors of the civilization that produced Socrates and Pericles and the Parthenon. This is the thing that Thucydides forces you to confront: that civilization and barbarism are not separated by an ocean of moral progress, but by a very thin membrane. And the membrane is pressure tested continuously, and it fails more often than the story of civilization prefers to acknowledge. I am aware that we have entered, in these last several lessons, territory that is somewhat darker than where we began. This is not an accident. The Greeks did not flinch from the dark, and I do not think you should either. Not tonight, in this particular quality of honesty that the late hours produce. The myths and the history and the philosophy all circle the same truth, that human life contains irresolvable tensions, genuine tragedy, real darkness that is not amenable to resolution by philosophical argument alone. And the response to this darkness that the Greeks most admired was not optimism, not the denial of the darkness, but a kind of clear-eyed endurance that they called sophrosyne, a combination of moderation, self-awareness, and the capacity to remain functional in the face of what cannot be changed. Lesson 40. Sophrosyne and the discipline of the middle. Sophrosyne is usually translated as temperance, which is adequate but insufficient. It suggests the management of excess, the avoidance of too much. But the Greeks meant something richer. They meant the possession of the self, the quality of someone who is not carried away by their passions, their fears, their desires, not because they have suppressed those things, but because they have developed the capacity to hold them without being held by them. The sophron person is not cold. They are not emotionally limited. They feel fully, but they have developed a relationship with their own inner life that is not one of being perpetually at its mercy. This is the goal of much of Greek philosophy, and it connects everything we have been discussing. The Stoic practice of distinguishing what is within control from what is not. The Epicurean cultivation of simple pleasures over anxious accumulation. The Socratic practice of examining the life rather than simply living it. The Aristotelian project of developing good habits until virtue becomes second nature. All of these are different approaches to the same underlying goal. Becoming the kind of person who is not perpetually driven by unexamined impulse, who can respond rather than react, who can meet difficult circumstances without being defined by them. The interesting thing about sophrosyne as a goal is that it is not achieved by trying to feel less, that approach. The management of emotion through suppression produces the opposite of sophrosyne. What it produces is pentheus, the man whose control is so rigid and so invested in its own necessity that when the controlled thing finally breaks through, it breaks through with a force proportional to how long and how completely it was denied. Sophrosyne is achieved by feeling more accurately, by developing a relationship with your inner life that is responsive rather than defensive, that allows the full range of experience without being organized around the avoidance of any particular part of it. We are approaching the third movement of this journey now. The chapters ahead are concerned not with more stories, but with the quiet revelation that the stories have been building toward. The thing that all of this ancient material is trying to say to you specifically tonight in the particular configuration of your life and your questions and your unnamed weight. I want to begin this section with an image that I keep returning to that seems to contain something important. There is a painting, not ancient Greek, but that does not matter, of a man sitting at the edge of a cliff looking out at clouds, not at the horizon, not at any particular destination, but at the clouds. His back is to us. We cannot see his face. He is simply there, at the edge, in the fog. The painting is by Caspar David Friedrich, and it is called Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog. And what strikes me every time I encounter it is not the drama of the figure at the cliff edge, that is the obvious reading, but the quality of the looking. He is not agonized. He is not triumphant. He is attending. He is giving his full attention to something that has no clear meaning, no legible lesson, no practical application. He is looking at clouds because they are there and they are worth looking at. And he is a person who finds things worth looking at. This is what the Greeks called theoria in its oldest form. Not theory in the academic sense, but the practice of contemplation, of sustained, receptive attention to the world. The word shares a root with theater. Both involve watching, attending, being present to something outside yourself with a quality of genuine receptivity. Aristotle believed that theoria, the contemplative life, was the highest form of human existence. Not because it was useful, not because it produced anything measurable, but because it was the activity most consistent with the best thing in us, the rational and attentive faculty that makes us most fully what we are. Lesson 41. The examined life and its particular rewards. Socrates' most famous claim that the unexamined life is not worth living is usually presented as a call to intellectual rigor, and it is that. But it is also something simpler. It is an observation about quality of experience. The examined life, in Socratic terms, is not more comfortable than the unexamined one. It is frequently more uncomfortable, but it is more awake, more present to what is actually happening, more able to find in what is happening something that is genuinely interesting, genuinely moving, genuinely there rather than processed through the blur of inattention. The examined life is a life that is actually happening to you, rather than a life that is happening in the general vicinity of a self that is elsewhere. You are practicing something like this right now, tonight. The decision to spend this particular evening in this particular way, with ideas, with the long, slow movement of sustained thought, is a choice to examine rather than to numb, to attend rather than to distract. This is not a small choice. In the current landscape of available options for how to spend a late evening, the choice to be present to something slow and thoughtful rather than something fast and stimulating is a meaningful one. The Greeks would have recognized it as a kind of philosophical practice, even if the content seems distant from ancient Athens. Lesson 42. The question of the good life and why every answer is partial. What is the good life? This is the organizing question of Greek ethics, and the Greeks produced at least 4 distinct and substantially different answers to it, each internally coherent, each supported by impressive argument, and each genuinely in tension with the others. The Epicureans said, a life of simple pleasure, free from fear and unnecessary desire. The Stoics said, a life of virtue, of correct response to what happens regardless of its content. Aristotle said, a life of eudaimonia, flourishing, the full exercise of human capacities in a well-ordered community. And the Cynics, Diogenes and his barrel, who rejected almost everything, said, a life free of the false values that civilization imposes, a life in accordance with nature, however shocking that life might appear to people who had confused convention with reality. Each of these answers captures something real. Each misses something real. The Epicurean life can become too enclosed, too defended against the very experiences that produce the richest living. The Stoic life can become cold, can mistake equanimity for wisdom, can produce a person who manages their inner life with great skill and feels very little in the process. Aristotle's flourishing requires conditions, a community, a certain level of material security, the political freedom to participate, that are not available to everyone. And he knew this, and it is a permanent limitation of his account. The Cynic life is honest about many of the absurdities of conventional existence and cannot build anything. It is criticism, not construction, and human beings need to build things. The partial truth in each of these positions is, I think, the real wisdom, not that any single account of the good life is correct, but that each is pointing at something that the others tend to miss, and the full picture requires all 4 at once. The Epicurean attention to the quality of present experience, the Stoic capacity for equanimity in the face of what cannot be changed, the Aristotelian understanding that flourishing requires the right conditions and community, and the Cynic willingness to look at the conventions everyone else accepts without question and ask whether they are actually producing what they claim to produce. A person who can hold all 4 of these orientations simultaneously, applying the right one to the right situation rather than committing to any single one as the whole answer, is further along in the practice of the philosophical life than any school of thought alone can take them. Lesson 43. The daemon and the question of what calls you. Socrates spoke throughout his life of a daemon, a divine spirit or inner voice that he experienced as a kind of guide. He was careful about its nature. It did not tell him what to do, it only told him what not to do. When he was about to make a choice that was contrary to his deepest nature or to what was genuinely right for him, the daimon intervened, a kind of internal stopping signal. He could not always explain its logic. He trusted it anyway. The daimon is interesting because it describes an experience that many people have and few traditions give them adequate language for. The experience of an inner prompting that does not come from rational deliberation, but which seems to know something that the deliberating mind has not yet figured out. The feeling that something is wrong with a situation before you can articulate what is wrong with it. The recognition that a particular direction is not yours, even when the external arguments for taking it are compelling. This is not mysticism. It is the intelligence of a deeper layer of self that has processed more than the conscious mind has access to, what we might now call intuition. Though that word has been devalued by association with instinct and impulse, and the daimon is something more specific and more trustworthy than either. The question the daimon raises for your actual life tonight is not philosophical, it is practical. What has your inner voice been telling you that you have been having difficulty hearing? Not in the sense of dramatic guidance towards some great purpose, in the quieter sense. The persistent signal that something in your current arrangement is not quite right, or that something you have been putting off deserves to be returned to, or that a particular relationship or pattern of behavior has been costing you more than you have admitted. The daimon tends to be patient. It tends to repeat itself without aggression, without urgency, without the quality of demand. It simply persists in the background until either something changes or you develop the capacity to no longer hear it. The latter is a loss. It is always a loss. Lesson 44. The problem of acrasia and why we do what we know we shouldn't. Aristotle identified a phenomenon he called acrasia, usually translated as weakness of will or incontinence. It describes the condition of doing something you know to be wrong, not because you have made a mistake about what is right, but because you know perfectly well what is right and you do the opposite anyway. You know you should stop. You keep going. You know this is bad for you. You do it anyway. You know you will regret this tomorrow. Tonight it seems worth it. This was puzzling to Greek philosophers because it seemed to violate the principle that knowledge is virtue, that to know the good is to do the good. If you know that something is harmful and you do it anyway, what exactly is happening? Aristotle's answer was careful and still seems accurate. In the moment of temptation, the knowledge is present but not fully activated. You know in the abstract, in the remembered, in the reflective sense that this will be bad for you. But in the immediate moment, the pull of the present desire is experienced as more real, more vivid, more weighty than the anticipated consequence. The knowledge is overwritten temporarily by the intensity of the present experience. The implication of this, and Aristotle was direct about it, is that virtue is not primarily a matter of knowledge but of habit. It is not enough to know what is right. You have to have practiced the right response often enough that it is available to you in the moment when the temptation is present and the knowledge is being outweighed. Virtue is a groove, worn into the character by repeated choice, that makes the right response increasingly automatic. This is why Aristotle said that we become just by doing just things, brave by doing brave things, temperate by doing temperate things. We are not learning what these things are. We are training the self to enact them under conditions where the enacting is difficult. What this means for the acratic moments in your own life, and everyone has them in different domains, is not that you lack character or intelligence or genuine commitment to what you believe is right. It means that the habit has not yet formed deeply enough to be available in the moment when you most need it. This is not a verdict. It is a description of where you are in a process that is always in progress. The habit can be built. It is built through exactly the kind of repeated choice that feels meaningless in any single instance and that accumulates over time into something that actually changes who you are and what you find yourself doing when no one is watching, and the outcome is entirely up to you. Lesson 45. The Phaedo and the Philosopher's Practice as Preparation for Death. The Phaedo is Plato's account of the last hours of Socrates' life. The conversation he had with his friends in his prison cell on the day he drank the hemlock. The conversation is characteristically philosophical. They discuss the soul. They discuss the arguments for its immortality. They discuss what happens after death. Several different arguments, none of them entirely convincing by the standards Socrates himself applies, which he acknowledges. And running through the whole conversation is a claim that Socrates makes several times and that has puzzled readers for millennia, that the practice of philosophy is a preparation for death, and the philosopher has been dying throughout their life and should therefore not be afraid when death actually arrives. This sounds morbid. It is not morbid, or at least not entirely. What Socrates means by practicing death is the philosophical practice of distinguishing the soul from the body, of learning not to be identified with your physical appetites, your immediate sensations, your attachment to specific material conditions. Death is the ultimate version of this, the final separation of the soul from the body, the final letting go of all the things the body has insisted are necessary. If you have been practicing this throughout your life, practicing the loosening of your grip on what the body wants, practicing the capacity to exist without the constant satisfaction of immediate desire, then death is not a new situation. It is the final and complete version of something you have been doing all along. I am aware that this is an uncomfortable idea for someone in his 20s or early 30s for whom death is abstract and not immediately relevant. I am not raising it to produce anxiety. I am raising it because the underlying practice of loosening the grip, of learning not to be entirely defined by your immediate desires and fears, is one of the most valuable practices available, and it is most effectively begun before it is urgently necessary rather than after. The person who has spent 30 years practicing attachment to every comfort and avoidance of every discomfort does not suddenly become flexible in a crisis. The person who has spent 30 years practicing some version of letting go, practicing impermanence, practicing the acceptance of what cannot be controlled, meets the crisis as someone who has prepared for it, even without knowing what specific form it would take. Lesson 46. Heraclitus Revisited, Logos and the Hidden Structure of Things. We met Heraclitus early in this journey, with his river and his fire and his insistence on flux. I want to return to him now because there is another concept in his fragments that becomes relevant at this stage of the conversation. He believed that the universe was governed by a principle he called logos, an ordering principle, a rational structure, underlying the constant flux of experience. The chaos was not pure chaos. The change was not random. Behind the endless becoming, there was a pattern, a logos, that could in principle be perceived by a mind sufficiently attentive and sufficiently free from the distortions of ordinary habit. This logos was not available to everyone, Heraclitus thought. Most people, in his view, were asleep to it. They moved through their lives acting as if the world were organized by their preferences and their immediate experience, never perceiving the larger pattern within which their experience occurred. The philosopher was the one who had awakened to the logos, not completely, not finally, but partially enough to recognize that the world is not chaos, that there is something to be understood rather than merely endured. The contemporary resonance of this idea is not in any particular claim about the structure of the cosmos. It is in the quality of attention it describes, the willingness to look for pattern rather than imposing it, to receive the structure of things rather than projecting your expectations onto them, to be surprised by what is actually there. This is a quality of mind that is available to anyone, and it produces a relationship with experience that is qualitatively different from the one that comes from treating each situation as simply an occasion for desire or avoidance. It is the attitude of the scientist and the artist and the philosopher and the contemplative approached from different angles toward the same underlying disposition. The willingness to attend to what is rather than to what you wish were the case. There is a particular quality to this hour of the night, whenever it has arrived for you, whatever time it happens to be. The body is tired, but the mind has that strange late-night clarity that arrives when the usual noise has finally subsided. This is one of the hours when the logos is slightly more perceptible than usual, when the pattern of things shows through just barely, just enough to remind you that there is one, when the person you are and the life you are living and the questions you are carrying feel slightly more legible to you than they do in the managed daylight hours. I want to invite you to attend to that legibility, whatever form it takes for you in this specific moment. Not to analyze it, not to extract lessons from it, just to notice it, to be present to the slight increased transparency of things that comes in the late hours when the defenses have softened. Lesson 47. Zeno's paradox and the philosophy of the step that is always enough. Zeno of Elea, not Zeno the Stoic, a different Zeno much earlier, proposed a series of paradoxes about motion that have kept philosophers busy for 2.5 millennia. The most famous is Achilles and the tortoise. Achilles races a tortoise. He gives it a head start. When Achilles reaches where the tortoise was, the tortoise has moved forward a little. When Achilles reaches that new position, the tortoise has moved forward again. This continues, apparently without limit. By the logic of infinite divisibility, Achilles should never be able to catch the tortoise. And yet, of course, he does catch it. We know he does. We can see it happen. The paradox is not about physical reality. It is about the limits of a certain kind of mathematical or logical reasoning when applied to the continuous flux of actual experience. The philosophical lesson I want to draw from Zeno is not about motion or mathematics. It is about the relationship between a goal and the steps toward it. When you think about the goal, the destination, the version of yourself you're trying to become, the life you're trying to build, and you think about the distance between where you are now and where that is, the reasoning can become Zenonian. There is always more distance. Each step closes the gap, but does not close the gap entirely. By a certain logic, you never arrive. And this is the logic that produces paralysis, the feeling that the distance is infinite and the steps are therefore pointless. But of course you arrive. Of course the steps accumulate. The distance is real, and the steps are real, and the accumulation is real. And the Zenonian reasoning that says otherwise is applying a certain kind of logic to a situation that the logic does not capture. The step you take tonight, whatever small, unsexy, unglamorous increment of movement you are capable of making in the direction of who you want to become, is not meaningless because it does not close the entire gap. It closes the gap it closes, and the next step closes the gap it closes, and eventually, not through any single dramatic moment of arrival, but through the unremarkable accumulation of steps, you look up and discover that you are somewhere different from where you started, and the tortoise is behind you, and the gap that seemed infinite turned out not to be. Lesson 48. The Delphic maxims and the ethics of self-knowledge continued. The oracle at Delphi had 3 famous inscriptions above its entrance, of which Know Thyself is the most celebrated. The second was Nothing in Excess, Meden Agan, and the third was Certainty Brings Insanity, Egua Paradate, which is less often quoted, but perhaps the most interesting. Certainty brings insanity, the conviction that you know definitely, completely, without remainder, is itself a form of madness. The willingness to remain uncertain, to hold your convictions with some looseness, to remember that you might be wrong and that being wrong is not the same as being worthless. This willingness is, by the Delphic account, the mark of a sane and functioning mind. These three maxims, taken together, constitute a philosophical program of astonishing compression. Know yourself. Do nothing in excess. Hold your certainties loosely. You could build an entire life on those three instructions, and it would be a better life than most, not because the instructions are difficult. They are very simple, but because they are continuously difficult. Because they apply not once, but every day in every situation. And following them requires the kind of ongoing attention that most of us prefer to redirect toward things that feel more urgent and more immediately rewarding. Lesson 49. Fate, character, and the strange collaboration between what happens and who you are. There is a Greek saying, attributed to various sources, and the attribution matters less than the content. That character is fate. Ethos, anthropos, daimon. Your character is your destiny. This sounds deterministic, as if the person you are already fixes the life you will live. But the Greek usage of this phrase was more dynamic than that. Character, in the Greek philosophical tradition, is not fixed. It is built by choices, by practice, by the habits that the self develops in response to what it encounters. Character is fate not because it is predetermined, but because it is the filter through which everything that happens passes, and the filter shapes what comes out the other side. If you want to understand why your life has taken the shape it has, look at your character, not as a verdict, not to assign blame or punishment, but as a description of the mechanism. The pattern of your choices over time expresses something about who you are, and who you are determines a great deal about what kind of opportunities you can see and what kind of difficulties you tend to create and what kind of people you draw into your life and what you do with them when they arrive. This is not destiny in the sense of a fate imposed from outside. It is destiny in the sense of a trajectory, a direction that is not random but that follows from the specific shape of who you are. And because character is built rather than given, the trajectory is alterable, not arbitrarily, not by wishful thinking or by the decision to simply be different, but by the slow, deliberate, often unglamorous work of practicing different choices until different choices become who you are. Lesson 50. The return. Every journey has a return, and the return is never to the same place you left. Odysseus came back to Ithaca. He was changed. Ithaca was mostly the same. He had to fight for it. He had to reclaim what was his. And then he had to live in it as the person he had become rather than the person who had left, which is a different and, in some ways, harder task than the journey itself. The journey changes you. The return asks you to integrate what the journey produced, to carry what you have learned back into the ordinary, into the daily, into the specific and practical texture of the life you actually have, rather than the theoretical version of the better life that existed somewhere ahead of you during the journey. The return is the lesson that contains all the other lessons. Everything we have discussed tonight, every myth, every philosophical fragment, every slow descent into the question behind the question, points toward this, not toward some transcendent escape from your life as it actually is, not toward a dramatic transformation that exempts you from the ordinary difficulty of being alive, toward a slightly different relationship to that ordinary difficulty, toward the possibility of moving through your specific life with more of yourself present and more of what you know actually informing what you do. This is not a small thing. It is arguably the only thing, and it does not require that the life itself change, though it may change, and the changes you make from this quality of attention will tend to be better than the changes you make from the quality of inattention that most of our days are conducted in. You have the myths, you have the fragments, you have the stories of people who felt what you feel, and thought what you think, and suffered what you suffer, and who, in the midst of all of it, managed to say something worth hearing 2,000 years later. You have Prometheus's defiance, and Penelope's patience, and Orpheus's love, and Athena's intelligence born from swallowed fear, and the Stoics' absolute insistence on the sovereignty of the interior. These are not solutions, they are company, and company, in the late night hours when the weight is present and the answers are absent, is not a small thing. Now comes the part of the evening that matters most. Not the philosophy in the abstract, not the myths at their safe distance, but the question of what any of this means for tonight, for the specific person you are in the specific life you have carrying the specific weight that brought you here. Because all the wisdom in the world, held at arm's length as interesting content, is just content. What changes something? What changes you? Is the moment when an idea stops being about other people and starts being about you. When the myth stops being a story and starts being a mirror. When the philosopher stops being a historical figure and starts being someone who has looked into the same dark you are looking into and come back with something to say. So let me speak directly to you now, not to the general listener, to you. You who are awake at this hour, or nearly awake, or somewhere in that permeable border between waking and sleep where certain truths arrive more easily. You who feel most of the time slightly more behind than you should be. You who compare yourself to others and find the comparison does not quite work in your favor, even when objectively it should. You who have genuine gifts and genuine dreams and a persistent, nagging sense that neither is being expressed as fully as they could be. You who have been kind to people who did not always deserve it, and have sometimes treated unkindly the people who did. You who are braver in your imagination than in your actual choices and know it, and live with the gap between them as a quiet source of shame. The Greeks had a word for the gap. They would say you are in a state of incompleteness. Not failure, not ruin, but incompleteness. The work of becoming more fully yourself is ongoing and is never finished. And the evidence of its incompleteness is not evidence that you are doing it wrong. It is evidence that you are in the middle of something rather than at the end of it. That you are in the most honest possible reading of your situation, alive and in process, and therefore inherently incomplete in the way that anything alive and in process is inherently incomplete. A tree in spring is not a failure of a tree because it has not yet produced its full canopy. It is a tree in spring. This is, I know, easy to say and difficult to receive, but I offer it anyway, because it is true, and truth tends to work on you even when you cannot feel it working. What would it mean? Concretely, practically, in the texture of the actual life you are living, to apply what we have been discussing tonight. Let me offer some suggestions, not as prescriptions, but as possibilities. Things that the tradition we have been walking through might suggest to a specific person in a specific moment. It might mean choosing in the days after this to spend some portion of each day in something resembling theoria, in sustained receptive attention to something that does not have to produce anything. Not meditation in the formal sense necessarily, though that is available if it calls to you, but the deliberate practice of attending to something. A piece of music, a walk, the particular quality of light at a specific hour, without immediately converting the attention into content, into something to share, into a story about yourself. The ancient practice of contemplation is available to anyone. It requires only the decision to make it a practice rather than an accident. It might mean choosing to examine one thing, one specific, concrete thing in your life, with the Socratic method applied not to an external question, but to an internal one. Not what is justice in the abstract, but what am I doing specifically when I tell myself this story about why this particular situation is not my responsibility? What is the argument I'm actually making? And if I were the questioner rather than the person being questioned, what would I say next? This is uncomfortable. It tends to produce results, not immediately. Socratic questioning almost never produces immediate resolution, but over time, with honesty, it tends to reveal the architecture of the assumptions you have been living inside without knowing they were assumptions. It might mean finding or renewing a friendship that has the quality of Aristotle's highest category. Not a comfortable friendship necessarily, not a friendship that never challenges you or makes demands on you, but one in which something is at stake, in which the other person sees you with enough accuracy to be genuinely useful, in which your presence in their life matters beyond the entertainment you provide, in which you are both engaged in something larger than either of you. These friendships are rare, and they require work, and they require the willingness to be seen, which is much harder than it sounds for most people who have spent significant energy on the construction of a presentable self. It might mean practicing, in small and unglamorous ways, the Stoic distinction, not as a complete philosophical system, not with the full rigor of someone who has read Epictetus in the original Greek, but as a daily question of the things I am spending energy on today, which are within my control, and which are not. Which category is receiving my attention, and is that the right allocation? This is not a question that can be answered permanently. It has to be answered continuously, daily, in the specific context of what each day brings. But the practice of asking it over time tends to produce a redistribution of attention toward what can actually be changed, and away from the enormous amount of energy that gets spent on the management of what cannot. It might mean developing a more honest relationship with your own minotaur, the thing in the center of the labyrinth you have built to contain it. Not going in today necessarily, not the dramatic confrontation tonight, but perhaps simply acknowledging that the labyrinth exists, that something lives in it, that the energy required to maintain the maze is energy that is not available for anything else, and that at some point, not necessarily tonight, you might go toward the center rather than continuing to root around it. This is the work of a lifetime, and it cannot be rushed, but it can be begun. It is always being begun. The beginning is available in every moment, including this one. The practices I am describing are not the practices of an exceptional life. They are the practices of an ordinary life lived with somewhat more attention than the default. The Greeks understood this. Philosophy was not for the elite, or at least the best of the Greek philosophers believed it was not. Socrates conducted his philosophical conversations in the marketplace with anyone who was willing. Epictetus taught slaves and emperors the same things. The practice of wisdom was available to anyone willing to take it seriously, and the most important version of it happened not in the lecture hall, but in the daily texture of actual experience, in the way you respond to frustration, in the way you treat someone who cannot do anything for you, in the quality of attention you bring to a conversation that has nothing to offer you except the person in it. Let us spend a few minutes now with something that has been sitting in the background of this entire conversation, waiting to be named. The thing that I think most people who feel the weight you feel are actually looking for is not an answer, not a solution, not a plan or a system or a set of practices that will, if followed correctly, produce the experience of a life that feels right. What they are looking for is permission. The permission to be as complicated and incomplete and uncertain as they actually are, without that complication and incompleteness being evidence of failure. The permission to be in the middle of something that has no clear end, without the middle being a problem that should be solved before life can be properly inhabited. The Greeks give this permission in the form of myth. When you read the story of Odysseus and realize that the greatest adventure story in Western literature is primarily about a man trying to get home and failing repeatedly for 10 years, and that the failure is not a detour from the real story, but is the real story. When you realize that this is what Homer was saying the good life looks like, the life worth singing about, something shifts. The failures and detours and long circling approaches of your own life stop being evidence that something has gone wrong. They become, in the Homeric light, the actual content of the journey, the substance of who you are being built. When you read the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, a man who had every material reason to feel that his life was in order, who nonetheless wrote daily reminders to himself to be patient, to not be angry, to remember that everything passes, to get out of bed. You realize that the internal weather of your own experience is not aberrant, that the most powerful man in the ancient world sat in his private hours with the same quality of restlessness and doubt and effortful aspiration that you sit with in yours. That the project of becoming a better person does not become easier with power or wealth or success. It becomes, if anything, more demanding, because the stakes are higher and the temptations are larger, and the person who has achieved a great deal has further to fall when the achievement turns out not to have solved what they needed it to solve. There is enormous consolation in this recognition if you let it land, not the consolation of being told you are fine when you are not, but the consolation of community, of discovering that the specific quality of your difficulty is shared, has always been shared, is part of the inheritance of being a thoughtful human being in any era, in any civilization, under any set of conditions. You are not uniquely broken. You are not uniquely confused. You are participating tonight in the oldest conversation in the Western tradition. The conversation that begins with the recognition that something is not yet right and asks honestly and without immediate expectation of an answer what it would mean for it to be better. Let me tell you about one more figure, not a myth, not a philosopher, but a historical person who embodied something I want to leave you with. Hypatia of Alexandria was a mathematician, an astronomer, and a philosopher who taught in the tradition of Neoplatonism at the end of the 4th century CE, when the ancient world was in the process of ending and something new was violently beginning. She was remarkable in every measurable way. Her mathematical work was real and lasting. Her philosophical teaching was by all accounts extraordinary. Her character was by all accounts genuinely admirable. She was also eventually killed for it, murdered by a Christian mob in 415 CE, which is usually presented as the collision between the ancient philosophical tradition and the new religious order, though the history is more complicated and more political than that simple narrative suggests. What I want to note about Hypatia is not her martyrdom. The deaths of philosophers are always sad and never the most interesting thing about them. What I want to note is what she was doing in the years before it. She was teaching. In the increasingly hostile and unstable political environment of late antiquity, with the world she had been trained in visibly ending, she was teaching mathematics and astronomy and philosophy to anyone who would come and listen. She was maintaining the practice. She was showing up for the transmission of what she knew to people who might carry it forward, even as the institution of which she was a part was being dismantled. There is something in this that I find, if not exactly hopeful. That word asks too much. Then at least sustaining. The practice continues. The questions persist. The conversation that began in the streets of Athens and continued in the gardens of Epicurus and the prisons of Epictetus and the military tents of Marcus Aurelius found its way somehow to us in this particular hour. At whatever distance from its origin, the river keeps moving. The fire keeps changing into new fire, and you are part of the flow. Lesson 45 continued, and the final movement of what we might call the practical. Let me name now the specific thing that connects all 50 lessons of this evening into a single undivided truth. The single thing that runs beneath the myths and the philosophy and the historical figures and the literary portraits, the thing that the Greeks from Homer to the Neoplatonists kept circling, kept approaching from new angles, kept trying to find a way to say that would make it legible and livable. You are not alone in this. You have never been alone in this. The weight you feel tonight, the unresolvedness, the sense of moving through life at a slight angle to your own potential, the late-night question that has no clean answer. This is not the mark of a person who has failed to figure out what others have figured out. It is the mark of a person who is genuinely engaged with the experience of being alive, who has not managed to anesthetize the fundamental strangeness and difficulty of existence, who is still after whatever years of trying, genuinely susceptible to the weight of the question. The Greeks would call this philosophically alive. We might call it awake, whatever we call it. It is not a problem. It is the beginning of the only kind of life that, at the end, you will be glad to have lived. The night is yours. The questions are yours, the 50 lessons of this evening. Partial, imperfect, true in the way that things pointed toward rather than demonstrated can be true, are yours now to carry or to set down or to return to in the morning in whatever fragment survives the passage into sleep. What survives is what was already part of you. What was already part of you is what was always going to survive. You brought it with you when you arrived at this evening, and you will carry it forward, even when you cannot feel that you are carrying anything. The river moves, the fire changes, the wine-dark sea continues. There is something that needs to be said about courage, not the dramatic battlefield kind. The Greeks had plenty of that, and the Iliad is its most sustained portrait, and we have touched on it enough. I mean the smaller, quieter, more continuously demanded kind. The courage that is required to keep showing up to a life that has not yet become what you hoped it would become. The courage that does not produce stories, but without which nothing that produces stories would ever be possible. The courage of the person who wakes up on the 150th morning in a row, when the practice is difficult and the progress is invisible and the alternative of simply not doing it is always available. And who does it anyway because something in them has decided that they will not be the person who stops. The Stoics had a name for this. They called it fortitudo, not the Latin word for courage in the battle sense, which was virtus, but a different quality. Harder to translate, something closer to endurance with dignity, the capacity to continue in circumstances that justify stopping. The Stoics were not interested in martyrdom. They were not interested in suffering for its own sake. They were interested in the person who continues not because they are indifferent to the difficulty, but because they have decided that what they are continuing toward is worth the difficulty, and who maintains that decision under the sustained pressure of circumstances that argue otherwise. Marcus Aurelius wrote something in the Meditations that I have returned to more times than I can count. He wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good person should be one." This has the quality of aphorism. Short, memorable, slightly too tidy. But the context of who was writing it and under what circumstances and for what purpose gives it a weight that the words alone cannot carry. He was writing it to himself, not as advice to others, not as a philosophical position to be defended, as a reminder, in the middle of an empire, in the middle of a war he had not chosen, in the middle of a life that was full of people and demands and the constant performance of power, that the work was not the argument, the work was the practice. The work was showing up and trying and failing and showing up again. The work was being a good person, incrementally, imperfectly, with full knowledge of your own inconsistency and trying again tomorrow. You can do this, whatever specific form it takes in your specific life, and the form will be specific, irreducibly yours, not the form of Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius or Penelope or any of the figures we have spent this evening with. You can do this, not because you have figured it all out, not because the weight has lifted, not because the questions have answers and the answers are satisfying, but because you are the kind of person who is awake at this hour with these questions, and that quality of wakefulness, that refusal to numb all the way down into the noise, is itself evidence of something. It is evidence that you are still reaching, still moving toward something, even when you cannot name it clearly, still alive to the question of how to live, which is, in the end, the only question that philosophy has ever been about. There is one more thing I want to offer before the night fully closes, and it concerns the question of what to do with a sense of purpose that feels absent or muffled or half-formed, the particular grief of wanting to live for something and not knowing yet what that something is. This is one of the most common and least discussed forms of suffering available to a thoughtful person in early adulthood, and the Greeks addressed it obliquely and directly in ways that deserve our attention. The word that matters here is telos, end, goal, purpose. Aristotle's entire ethical philosophy is organized around the concept. Everything in Aristotle's account has a telos, a purpose it is moving toward, the fulfillment of which constitutes its flourishing. The telos of a knife is to cut. The telos of a plant is to grow toward the light, produce seeds, complete its cycle. The telos of a human being is more complicated and more interesting, because human beings are not pre-programmed with their specific purpose the way a knife is. They have instead the capacity to discover and construct their purpose through the exercise of reason and the cultivation of character and the ongoing experience of a life being lived with some degree of reflection. What this means practically is that the absence of a clear sense of purpose is not evidence that you lack one. It is evidence that you have not yet discovered what Aristotle would call your specific telos, the particular form of flourishing that is consistent with your specific capacities and your specific nature. And the discovery of that telos is not a moment of revelation. It is a process of experimentation and attention and honest evaluation, the slow, incremental development of a relationship with your own experience that eventually reveals a direction that feels not perfect and not easy, but right, consistent with something essential in you, resonant in a way that other directions are not. The Greeks would tell you, Aristotle would tell you, that this discovery cannot be rushed, that it requires time and experience and a degree of honest self-knowledge that does not come quickly or without effort, that it tends to arrive not through deliberate searching, but through sustained engagement with the world and with yourself, through trying things and noticing what they produce, both in the external world and in the interior one, through paying attention to the moments of unusual absorption, the activities that make time disappear, the conversations that leave you more energized than when you began rather than drained. The telos tends to announce itself through these small signals before it announces itself in the larger, more legible form that we tend to wait for before believing it is real. This is perhaps the most practical thing the philosophical tradition has to offer someone at the stage of life where you may be tonight. Stop waiting for the revelation and start paying attention to the signals. The signals are there. They have been there probably for longer than you realize. The question is not whether you have a direction worth moving in. Almost certainly you do. The question is whether you are paying the kind of attention that would allow you to see it. Sophrosyne, theoria, the Socratic practice of examination. All of these applied to the specific question of your own life tend to produce over time increasing legibility. Not clarity in the final certain sense, but enough to move. And moving, as Zeno's paradox teaches, is how you get somewhere. Not by solving the distance, by taking the step. The Aristotelian insight about telos has one more dimension worth naming before we let it go, he believed, and this is the part that modern life tends to resist, that the telos of a human being was not primarily individual, that the fullest flourishing of a person required participation in something larger than themselves, that a human being isolated from community, from the common life of a shared world, was not fully realizing their telos, however excellent their individual achievements. This is not a comfortable claim in a culture that tends to frame achievement as fundamentally individual, but I think it is true, in the way that things you have vaguely always sensed but never quite heard said can be true, with the quality of recognition rather than surprise. Whatever you find yourself moving toward, whatever shape the telos of your specific life turns out to take, the Greeks would say, make sure it connects. Make sure it has the quality of contribution, not philanthropy in the formal sense, not the performance of social virtue, but the genuine orientation of your specific gifts towards something that exists beyond the edge of your own life, This is not self-sacrifice. It is, in the Aristotelian account, the condition of your own fullest flourishing. The person who lives entirely for themselves is not free. They are, in a way that the Stoics and Aristotle alike would recognize, imprisoned in the narrow confines of a world that contains only one person's wants and fears and perceptions, without the expansion that comes from genuine engagement with others. One human life honestly lived, in genuine relation with a community and a tradition and a set of questions larger than that life. This is what the Greeks were describing when they described the good life. Not a life of constant happiness, not a life free from difficulty, not a life that arrived at all its destinations, a life that was genuinely engaged with the experience of being alive, that took its questions seriously, that brought its gifts to bear on the world with consistency and attention, and the ongoing, imperfect practice of trying to become someone worth being. This is available to you. It has always been available to you. It will be available to you tomorrow morning and the morning after, and in every moment that comes after this one, wherever you carry what this evening has offered. The night is nearly done with us. Let what remains be silence. And now we arrive at the final movement, the place where the narration slows and the ideas thin out, and what is left is something closer to silence than speech. I want to move more gently through this last section than I have through anything that came before. Not because there is nothing left to say, but because there is a kind of saying that requires the removal of most of the saying. The way a sculptor removes most of the stone to reveal what was always inside it. The ancient Greeks believed, and this was not merely a belief, but an experience tested and witnessed and written about in enough detail to be trusted as description rather than aspiration, that the mind at its best moments has a quality of stillness that coexists with its fullest activity. Not the stillness of emptiness, but the stillness of something that has arrived at its proper relationship to what it is doing. A musician in full absorption, an athlete in the kind of performance that is experienced as effortless precisely because the effort has become so fully integrated. A thinker in the middle of an idea that is moving through them faster than they can keep up with, so that the experience is less of thinking and more of being thought through. The Greeks called this, in different contexts and with different emphases, flow or enthusiasm. The word enthusiasm comes from entheos, which means in God, the experience of being inhabited by something larger than yourself, or in its most philosophical form, what Aristotle described as the full activity of the psyche in accordance with excellence, not working toward the excellent action, the actual doing of it in the moment, when the conditions are right and the practice has been sufficient and something happens that could not have been planned or forced or manufactured. This is what the examined life is building toward, not the achievement, the capacity for this quality of absorption in whatever the particular domain of your excellence happens to be. You will have moments of this. You may already have had them, moments when the self was most fully active and most fully gone simultaneously, when you were so completely in what you were doing that the watching, evaluating, comparing self temporarily vacated and what remained was just the doing. Whatever produced those moments is worth knowing about. Whatever conditions made them possible is worth cultivating. This is not spiritual language, or not primarily, it is Aristotelian. It is the most practical observation available about what human beings are when they are at their most human. Let me tell you about one final image from the Greek tradition. There is a description in the Iliad of the moment just before dawn, when the stars are beginning to fade and the dark is becoming the color it becomes just before the light arrives. Homer describes the sky in that moment as deep furrowed, like a field that has been prepared for planting, marked with the parallel lines of the plow, waiting for the seed. It is a purely agricultural image in the context of a poem about war, and it produces in the middle of the poem's violence a moment of extraordinary tenderness toward the ordinary world. The sky at dawn is like a field prepared. The ordinary task of farming invades the epic language of battle and insists on its own dignity. This image has stayed with me as a way of thinking about what this evening is, a preparation, not the planting, not the harvest, the preparation, the furrowing of the ground, the making of the conditions in which something can grow. The ideas we have moved through tonight are not the content of a changed life. They are the marks of the plow in the ground of whatever follows this. What grows there will depend on what you bring to it. Your specific gifts, your specific courage, your specific willingness to continue the examination of the life you actually have with the specific questions it actually contains. The sky is preparing. The ground is ready. The dawn comes when it comes. What I want to leave you with, in these final minutes of the evening, is not a summary. Summaries close things, and I want this to remain open. What I want to leave you with is the feeling of having been in conversation, because that is what this is. Not a lecture you received, not content you consumed, but a conversation that the ancient Greeks began and that you participated in tonight, adding your specific presence and your specific questions to the 2,500-year record of human beings thinking together about what it means to be alive. Your presence in this conversation is part of what the conversation is. The fact that you showed up in this particular hour with this particular weight is itself a contribution to the ongoing human project of trying to understand what this is and how to be in it. Socrates died believing that the examined life was better than the unexamined one. He died with equanimity, drinking hemlock with the same quality of attention he brought to philosophical argument, treating death as an interesting problem rather than a catastrophe, maintaining to the end the quality of mind that had been his primary gift and his defining practice. I do not know if death is an interesting problem. I do not know on most days whether the examined life is definitively better than the unexamined one, or whether this is simply what some people's minds are like, and it is neither better nor worse, but simply different and unavoidable. What I know is that you are in the examined life already. The examination is already happening. The only question is whether you meet it with fear, or with something that resembles, at least partially, the equanimity that comes from having been here before, from having recognized that the weight is not new, the questions are not unique, and the darkness of this specific hour has always eventually, without fail, given way to a different quality of light. Sleep will come or it will not. The morning will come regardless, and the morning will contain your life, which is the only laboratory you have for testing anything you have thought about tonight. There is a line from a Greek author whose name has been lost, or perhaps it was never preserved, or perhaps it was always anonymous. That goes something like this. It has been translated many ways, and probably none of the translations are quite right, which is true of all the most important things. In the rough translation I find most useful, it says, "The path to the place you are going is the place you are going." Not that the journey is the destination, which is too tidy, but that the path and the destination are made of the same substance. That what you do on the way to who you want to be is already, in some sense, who you are becoming. That the going is the arriving, continuously in each moment of actually going. You are on the path. You have always been on the path. There is no departure required from where you already are. There is only the quality of attention you bring to where you already are, which can change, which is changing even now in the small hours of this particular morning. As the ideas settle and the night deepens and the part of you that knows things that your thinking mind has not yet caught up with begins slowly in its own time to feel what is true. Remain with the night for a while longer if you can. Let it do what it is doing. The stars Marcus Aurelius saw from his tent are outside if you want to look at them. The same stars, the same darkness between them, the same silence that the Greeks walked out into when they needed to think. When the city was too loud and the argument had gone as far as argument could go, and what was needed was not more words but the sky. There is something waiting at the edge of sleep that cannot be named or described or preserved in the morning. Something that comes only in the border territory between waking and dreaming, where the self is most porous and the questions can move most freely. Do not hold it too tightly when it comes. Let it be what it is. Let it leave what it leaves. The wine-dark sea is still. The stars are beginning their slow movement toward dawn. The ground has been prepared. Something will grow here. Rest now.